Prologue. Part 1. Earth year 2210 AD. Kryptonopolis City. Planet Krypton. I implore you, all of you, you must see reason on this. The entirety of Krypton is at stake. We may only have a matter of months, perhaps not even a full year. We hear your words, son of El, yet in truth, they have no meaning. What? No meaning? You cannot be serious. Despite how often he had come across the arrogance of the Science Council, it almost never failed to surprise and frustrate him in the time span of a single breath. I have warned you that harvesting our planet's core would be suicide. Now I bring you proof of Krypton's impending destruction, and you would do nothing. You have brought us proof of nothing, one of the ministers, Devem explained, looking altogether bored with their meeting, save for some half-mad scribbles and unfinished projections that you have conjured out of the recesses of your mind. He turned to face his colleagues, tabling the idea of a potential vote to have the son of El assessed by the Council for Health. I motion that we move past this madness and adjourn the session. There are real problems that we could and should be focusing our time on. Seconded, Wylavar added. Then it is decided, Worrell, the first minister and oldest member of the Science Council, declared, Jor-El, you are hereby ordered to desist with these ridiculous theoretical experiments. For the good of peace, you are also ordered to not reveal what we have discussed here to anyone. I will not have you causing mass panic over naught but poorly thought out theories. In the interim, an absence from your work is also recommended. As I understand, you and your wife are expected to design a child soon. Jor-El could feel his eye twitching as he ground his teeth together. Lara and I have already begun the process. Then might I suggest that you take a work reprieve to create and spend time with their heir to the House of El. As the Council for Health would say, rest for the body can conjure wonders for the mind. Feeling as if he'd been forced to swallow a pill of bitterest taste, Jor-El bowed his head. Of course, Minister. Excellent. He stood up, and as he rose, so too did the rest of the council. And in that moment, Jor-El knew that his pleas would go unheard. No matter which words he chose, or which method he tried, meeting adjourned. Krypton was dying. Jor-El knew of this for a fact. He knew that he was, in part, responsible for the coming death and destruction, as were many of their planet's inhabitants. He also knew that the damage was irreversible. With the Science Council, they could have looked to the stars, as their ancient ancestors once had, and sought out a new, habitable world for them to occupy. They could have rebuilt, forged Krypton anew, forged a purer, cleaner version of what was once intended. But no. Krypton had long since abandoned the rest of the universe for a policy of isolation. The Council would not break that policy now, not after all of these years. Not if it meant admitting that they had been wrong. But there was still time. Not for him, no. His time was passing, had passed, in fact, and his body's greatest years were already behind him. Lara, his chosen wife of many years, would not leave his side. He knew, having already offered to save her, but together, the two of them had already chosen to break one of the cardinal rules of Krypton. Ignoring the use of the birthing codex, ignoring the standard gene mapping sequences used by the rest of their society, they had chosen to do the taboo and instead have a natural birth. Together, they had created a child unbound from the expectations of society, or the trappings of a position and rank that they had been both designed and created for. It had been difficult to hide the changes that Lara had undergone, most especially her physical changes from carrying the child within her own womb. Luckily, Jor-El's position had allowed for him to request her presence in their home, as an assistant to one of his projects. Perhaps it was a response to his outburst to the Council, attempting to find a way to make him pause and relent, or simply to provide him with what they hoped would be a distraction. But his request had been granted, and swiftly at that. Lara had been given leave to remain home, and they had dealt with her changes privately. It hadn't been easy. Lara's body had undergone a radical shift in hormone levels, which had caused behavioral changes, mood swings at odd times, and constantly shifting opinions on matters that ranged from the minor to the massive. And that was not touching on the multitude of physical difficulties her condition had caused. But in the end, the result had been worth it. Kal-El, their son. The moment he had placed Kal in Lara's arms and sat beside them, their son, who had the bright green eyes of his mother and the constantly curious expression of his father, Jor knew that it had all been worth it. He'd felt the weight of his son in his arms, seen the brightness of his first smile, and watched in marvel, as Cal found the strength to crawl around their floor, curious and curiouser to discover every nook and cranny of their home. The home of his father that should one day be the home of him and his wife and their son after them, but even though Jor-El knew that it could never be. Krypton's time was running out. But there was enough time, just perhaps, for him to make sure that Cal would survive. Krypton was burning. Jor-El was too. He ran. He ran faster than he ever had in his life. Jor-El had a body that had been designed for the sciences, for an inactive body, and a mind that could not be contained by one train of thought. He hadn't been designed as a member of their military. His body had been designed for health, for the standard life of a Kryptonian, but there had been no need to give him adaptations for anything other than general fitness, and as he ran, his lungs struggled to pull in the air they needed, as the muscles of his legs and stomach burned. But he was so close. His lifelong friend since childhood, Zod, now a high general in the Krypton Security Force and the commander of the Kryptonopolis City Guard, had discovered the information that the Science Council had ordered Jor-El to bury. Krypton was dying around them, and they had decided to do nothing to prevent it. For their supposed crimes, Zod had declared them guilty of cowardice and genocide by inaction, and without lawful issue, sentenced them to death. It was already too late. Even if half the guard hadn't sided with the council, the damage was far too entrenched to be undone. They hadn't the time to evacuate Krypton, nor to even try and repair the damage done to the planet's core. He'd been in session with the council when Zod had walked into the chamber, or more accurately, his forces had blown the door wide open. Jor-El had rolled to the floor, flinging himself to safety. With a ringing in his ears, he'd fled as Zod killed the council and their sympathizers, knowing that his time was at an end. Jor-El had risen to his feet in indignation, his cheeks swelling red in his anger, as Zod leveled his charges at them. And just on whose authority do you dare to question us? He'd cocked his head to the side, amused, as he brought up his handheld Stasser. My own, had been his response before he'd opened fire. Jor-El hadn't waited to have his fate decided for him. Instead, he'd risen to his feet, fleeing once he'd realized what was happening. Zod's forces were battling against those dedicated to the council, determined to see them eliminated, but Jor-El didn't think that there'd be much in the way of resistance. Zod was not only one of the most skilled military leaders in the history of Krypton, imbued with the skills, knowledge, and attributes needed for his position, he was dedicated to self-improvement, believing in his heart that his strength was reflective of Krypton's, but Zod was almost universally respected by those in his chain of command, which included every member of the Kryptonopolis Security Force. Those among the KSF who weren't already with him would be given the choice. They could fight, and most likely die in the attempt, or they could kneel, be spared, and submit to Zod's authority. But it wouldn't do them any good. If his calculations were correct, and he was arrogant enough to know that his calculations were almost always correct, then the deterioration of the planet's core had accelerated. Despite his warnings, the Science Council had continued abusing the core as an energy resource. Their prospective many months of preparation had already dwindled down to a handful, then a smattering of weeks, and now they were down to just a few days. If Zod had called upon the core to power his weapons and vessels, and Jor-El was certain that he would have, then he would have pushed it further to the edge. The day of Zod's revolution could be Krypton's last. Krypton could have only hours left. He had no time to waste. So he did the only thing he could. He ran. L'Oreal was worried. Her husband had marched off earlier that morning with a desperate fervor, with a need to make the Science Council see some form of reason, to try and do something, anything, before it was too late. She already knew that he would fail. In her arms, Cal, as if sensing her unease, began to murmur distressingly, so she rocked him, rolling back and forth on the balls of her feet, as she murmured the same songs her mother had once done for her. She didn't have the same natural abilities that her husband had when it came to the sciences. She had been born Lara Lorvan of House Van from the island of Twinks, a daughter of two relatively low-position members of the Historians Guild. She'd met her future husband during a conference in Argo. Neither of them had had their lives decided for anyone as yet, and they had both infatuated with each other from the early days of their meeting. It had taken beseeching the council for the two of them to be given permission to marry, and that brought its own stigma with it, but that hadn't mattered to them. Her marriage to Jor-El had also permitted her children to be elevated into the ranks of the Science Guild. One day, they could be afforded the same ranks and privileges as Jor-El. More, even, should his work continue to impress, and their child's work did too. She may have been given none of those things when she was designed, but what she did have was the intuition of a mother. Her intuition told her that Cal was in the danger, that he wasn't safe. She didn't need the explosions to tell her that something was wrong. She began activating their home's security features. As one of the most intelligent men on Krypton, Jor-El had been offered the highest of security features for his home, and he had taken all of them. He'd then added additional defenses of his own design atop them, knowing that one day, he may very well need them. Today, it seemed, was going to be that day. Once their home was prepared, Lara chose to prepare herself, setting Cal down for a moment, while she retrieved the Stasser pistols and cannon that they had tucked away. She had made sure that the pistols were charged and was in the process of making sure that the cannon was still usable when Jor-El returned home, almost flinging himself through the doors and getting shot for his efforts. "My love." Sweeping Cal up into her arms, she made her way over to him. "What dash?" "Zod," he gasped out as he forced himself upright. "He has killed the council, taken control. Lara, I think that he has accelerated the implosion. The explosions you see, they were not caused by his men, they are Krypton itself." He shook his head. "Our planet may not even have hours left." "No," the breath left her. "The ship is not ready." She shook her head. "We are not ready. We will not have long before Zod makes his way to us. Whether he decides he wants me executed or working to fix the damage, it matters not. There is not enough time left." "But Dash." "No, Lara," he shook his head again. "We can afford to delay no longer. I can run no more tests. There is no time to plan for more than I already have." Together, they headed up their stairs, to the second most secure room in the building, Jor-El's laboratory. Usually kept meticulously tidy, with every surface clean and polished to perfection, Lara felt her eyes widen as she took in the sight of the mess and chaos. Tables that were usually covered in a variety of gadgets and gizmos that Lara could not help to understand were instead filled with similar parts, each one forming part of a larger project. The only project Jor-El had spent his time on as of late. The ship. Their house pet, Crypto, a white canine, perked up as they entered the room, having been silently sat beside one of the workstations, dutifully guarding his master's work from interlopers. The plan had always been to send Crypto ahead of Cal, to check that the technology worked, but Jor-El knew that he no longer had the weeks he would need. Instead, Cal would have to be their first and only voyage. Kellex, K-Layer. His home's robotic aids floated down from the ceiling, slowly blinking to life. "Good morning, Master. How may we serve the House of El?" "The ship," he began. "If we were to change test flight for immediate interstellar, how close to completion are we?" "Your test ship would be approximately 94.173% complete. All remaining works required involve the connection of repurposed phantom drive technology." He sighed, knowing they wouldn't have, but desperately hoping that his aides would have already started that work without his presence. "Connect the drive now with all of the adjustments I made. I want it ready at the earliest possible moment, and I want to know the very instant it is ready." "Of course, Master. We will commence at once." Satisfied, knowing that they would work quicker than he could himself, he turned to face Lara. "We still need to prepare the Stones of Knowledge if we wish to preserve his heritage. We also need to choose a final destination." "The stones are ready," she whispered, clutching Cal tighter to her. "I prepared them all myself." "My historian extraordinaire," Jor-El murmured, feeling something loosen within his chest. "Come then, I have some notes on habitable worlds." Lara could not bring herself to put her son down for even a moment, knowing that every second spent with him in her arms was more precious than the last. She allowed Jor-El to bring up his projections, surrounding themselves with orbs glowing in a soft blue light. "We have options, Dash." "I already chose one," she said softly. her eyes searching out the world in question, where she found it hovering beside Jor-El's left knee. He turned to her, no doubt surprised that she would have even considered her choices. You did. Orbiting a main sequence yellow star, she closed her eyes. Just like you said it should do. A young star, she added, roughly half of the way through its main life cycle. Designation? Jor-El asked, finding his voice had gone hoarse. Sol 3, she told him, still refusing to look at him. Local designation is the planet Earth. Indigenous life form, Earthlings, who also refer to themselves as the human race. Though she could not see it, she could see the flashes of blue light that meant the projector had shifted, and she knew that it would be showing the planet to him. Atmosphere is breathable, he began to murmur to himself, especially if he starts young. Oxygen and nitrogen rich, very nourishing. Gravity is weaker than what we have here. 7 mainland continents. Water coverage of 70%. Lifeforms fall within accepted visual parameters. Weather patterns are reminiscent of Krypton's prior to automation, with a single natural satellite. He shook his head. And on top of that, orbiting a main sequence yellow star. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. It is perfect. Master, the ship is ready. Your adjusted phantom drive thrusters have been installed. We have commenced a full charging, using full-strength core empowerment. Both Jor and Lara winced, knowing that they were hastening Krypton's destruction with every dram of power they took from the core, leaving themselves, and their friends and family, even less time to prepare for the looming apocalypse. Yet they gave no order to stop. Would you like me to prepare a destination? Yes, he murmured in response, his voice despondent, even to his own ears. Sol 3. Plot Cal a course for planet Earth. Lara rose back to her feet, reaching out, drawing her husband towards her and Cal, until the three of them were stood together. Maybe this is not the right path. Lara. I thought that I could do this, but now that he is here, she pulled Cal in closer, her son seemingly content to be closer to them. I do not know if I can. Lara, Jor reached over, brushing a hand across his son's forehead, moving minutely closer to his wife. Krypton is doomed. There is no saving it, but with this, Krypton has a chance to survive. Cal has a chance to survive. Wherever he goes, he will be an outcast. She fought back the urge to let tears fall. They will think him a freak. No, Jor-El shook his head. Look here. He brought up an outline of a formless Kryptonian body, highlighting key aspects of the body. The brain, the eyes, the heart. They have the same outward structure we do, but Earth's lesser gravity will make him far stronger there than any man here could ever hope to be. Under the light of a yellow sun, his cells will drink in its radiation, making him far more powerful than any Kryptonian that has come before him. He will be as a god to them. If he makes it there. He will, Jor-El was certain of it. He will more than survive, Lara, our son will thrive. But he will be alone. She wanted to cry, he knew, and knew that he did too. He should be with us. Will we not be with him for all of his days? Together, bound forever in love and spirit. But not physically. It wasn't a question, but Jor-El shook his head anyway. No. I cannot fathom the idea of him to be without us. With your stones, he will never have to be. Our knowledge, our legacy, our love will be there to guide him every step of the way. He will carry the knowledge of our sacrifice with him for all the days of his life. And with that, know that he will never be alone. He didn't know when he had started crying. With eyes that were likely just as wet as his own were, Lara reached out, cupping his cheek in the palm of her hand. He didn't know how long they stood there, together, until Kel reached up, reaching for them both. They chuckled, as they each gave him a finger to pull on, content to be close to him, and Lara leant forward, pressing kisses to both of them. Yes. And she gave them her consent. Jor-El oversaw the coordinate programming, while she sent Kalair to retrieve the 3 stones of knowledge she had prepared for him. Each one had been marked to hold an aspect of Krypton's vast store of knowledge, marked in one of the colors and elemental symbols of ancient Krypton. The red fire stone held everything they had on their sciences, on every aspect of mathematics and technology. The yellow air stone held their accumulated knowledge of art and culture, collected from the other races of the universe. And the blue water stone, her preferred piece, which contained the combined knowledge of Krypton's histories and tradition or their earliest religions and the growth of the children of Rao, not to mention those of other worlds. Yet the true masterpiece was of Jor-El's design, based on what information that she had brought from some of Krypton's earliest archives, when they were first using crystal-based storage. When the three stones were brought together and combined, they were programmed to form a Kryptonian fortress of knowledge, designed in the same image as their ancient crystal temples. With it, Cal would have a physical reminder of his people wherever he went. She tucked the stones in a pouch, setting them down behind the seat of Cal's pod, before setting Cal down in it himself. It wouldn't be long before it was time for him to depart, and for the first time, he began to react to their unease with his cries. "Oh, my son, my little star," she brushed her fingers through the few soft curls atop his head. "I only had the joy for knowing you a few weeks. I wish I could be with you always to guide you and protect you." "I am sorry, Lara," Jor-El murmured, "but we do not have much time. Kal-El, my dearest, know that our love will always be with you, and we may not be with you, but do not be afraid. You will need to be brave. You will need to be brave for what is to come, but you must know that you will never be alone. I can see already that you carry within your father's independent spirit. But more importantly, you carry your mother's never-ending bravery and her compassionate heart." Lara smiled through her tears. "Rao's light will guide you for all of your days to come. The world we have chosen is one full of complicated beings, each one capable of great love and great kindness. I wish for you to live a full and wonderful life, even without us, but you must know that you were born of great love between your parents. I see the same brilliant mind behind your eyes that your father has used to save you, to devise a way for that love to carry on. The ship that I have designed to carry you can only hold a single Kryptonian, one who has so much potential, so unlike your father. Ignore him, little one. Your father is a brilliant man, and one day so too shall you be. Neither your mother or I can come with you, but know that within you is the best of both of us, and we are send you with all of your world's knowledge and none of its pride or ego. They will disappear with Krypton. You will be tested, but know that whatever trials you face, your mother and I will never lose faith in you." Lara shook her head. "Not for one moment. And you must never doubt, not for a single second, that just as you are a part of us, we will always be a part of you. And remember, my love, above all things, to be true to yourself. Find a dream, make one if you need to, and then chase it. Have the confidence you need to make your dreams come true. And there is so much more I need to say to you. There is a lifetime's worth of knowledge that I wish to pass on to you. I want to be there, to hear you speak for the first time, to know the sound of your voice. I want to see you take your first steps, to see you choose your first destination and reach it under your own power. I want to see the path you choose for your life, and how you reach it, and see how you make us proud, no matter what you choose to do. I wish I could stay with you longer." "We both do." He pressed a kiss to his son's forehead. "We love you, my son Dash." "My little star," she finished for him, as Jor-El's computer told them everything was ready. "Prepare for launch," he whispered, unable to tear his eyes away from his son's. "We may not have been able to save our planet." Lara's voice was resolute, her tone filled with steel. "But we will save our son. Master, we have detected a security transport unit inbound. The identification broadcast indicates that General Druzad is aboard." Jor-El let slip a muffled curse that still had Lara clearing her throat, as he began throwing switches, moving with as much urgency as he felt he could. "Kalair, prepare the ship for immediate takeoff," he ordered. There could be no more delays. Zod would not be one to show any of them mercy, regardless of age or age-old friendships. Zod's only true allegiance was to his vision of Krypton. In his mind, Krypton was to be considered a utopia, and it was his job to see his vision made reality. Zod would allow nothing and no one to stand in the way of his mission, not even someone who could quite literally call himself Zod's oldest friend. "At once, Master." "Kelex," he said, more softly this time. "Take Kal and prepare for departure." "Yes, Master." As Kalair returned to the ship, Kelex floated over to them, reaching to take their son from Lara's arms, who almost immediately took a step back, cradling him closer to her chest. "Lara," he whispered, settling his hand on the small of her back, "we are out of time." She pressed another kiss to his head, her lips brushing aside soft curls that Jor-El hoped would never become the same mess his own did, when he left it untamed, before she raised him up, allowing him to do the same. They held him, yet another moment longer, before Lara finally relented, allowing Kellex to take him. With their eyes watching everything as it happened, Cal was gently lowered into the pod they had designed to keep him safe, as the general landed outside, his armored transport carrier parked alongside Jor-El's transport and safety vehicle. Jor-El was almost surprised to see his old friend actually use the guest warning buttons that signaled the occupants, and for a moment, he contemplated attempting to deny him entry, before he shook his head. Even if he denied him, Zod would simply give the order for his home's walls to be torn down. He opened the gates, allowing him and his men to step inside. They were dressed for battle, each one wearing full set of Kryptonian security armor over a black skin suit. Each one decorated with their family's crest on their chest piece, and their rank insignia along their collar. "Jor-El, by the authority of General Zod, you are Dash." "That's enough, Faura," the general cut off his most devoted lieutenant. "I did not come here for violence." Jor-El scoffed, using his head to gesture to the explosions in the distance. "Are you quite certain?" "I am." The man straightened himself up. "I have arrested the Science Guild." "Yes, I am aware. Might I ask on whose authority?" "My own." He reached out his hand, and for a moment, Jor-El could remember the days of their youth. His father Segel and Zod's mother Lyta had been the best of friends, determined to see their sons become the same, and they had. The two of them had been inseparable. "And I am here to ask that you join me." The two of them had been inseparable. Once. "You know what the Science Council has covered up. You, of all Krypton, must have ideas on how to save us, so I am here to ask you to help me save our race. We will start anew. Find a new world, rebuild and repopulate. Imagine it." And Jor-El he could easily imagine it. Krypton with a fresh start. The image of it was bittersweet in his mind. A fruit that could never be sampled. "We will sever the degenerative bloodlines that led us to this state and leave only the best of us behind." And there it was. Zod said, "Arrested," and held out his hand in friendship, but Jor-El could see the blood dripping from it, coated crimson with the life force of his friends and colleagues. "And tell me, old friend, who will decide which bloodlines are survive?" "You." Zod's jaw clenched, in the way Jor-El had known since he was a teenager, and saw his friend trying to contain his impressive temper. "Do not do this, El. The last thing I want is for us to become enemies. Not now." "Drew, look at yourself. You have abandoned all of the principles that bound us together. Honesty, integrity, peace. You have taken up your sword against your own people. The very people you swore to defend." Jor-El shook his head once again. "I will honor the man you once were, Zod, my friend, my brother. But I will not stand by this monster that you have allowed yourself to become. If you do not stand with me, Dash. Master, your orders have been fulfilled. Kal-El is secured and the hyperdrive is fully charged." Zod's eyes flew to K-Layer. As it descended from the ceiling, "Hyperdrive," he murmured. "Jor-El, what have you, Dash?" "Lara now. Ignition." So focused on Jor-El and the general, no one had been bothered by the matriarch of the House of El, as she moved to rest beside one of the home's many processing consoles. They had no way of knowing what it controlled, certainly not in the home of one of Krypton's leading scientists, and so they had ignored it and ignored her, not bothering with the lowly research historian while they focused on the scientist. Their mistake. Subcommander Faura lunged to stop her, faster than anyone else present could have, but she was simply too far away. Her son's life was at stake, and nothing and no one was going to prevent Lara Lorvan from doing everything in her power to save her child. She slammed her hand down on the final button. Their house vibrated with force, as above them, Cal's ship took off. The rooftop laboratory had been more than just a building area. Jor-El had designed it to serve as a launch pad in case of emergency. And this was an emergency. The thrusters activating shook the whole house, sending most of them, Jor-El and Lara included, stumbling to the floor, as the temperature skyrocketed and the walls cracked at the force. But that didn't matter. Cal was safe. Jor-El gasped as he felt hands around his neck, dragging him from the floor and pinning him to the wall. Zod pinned him there with ease, a single hand holding him up by the throat, as his eyes flashed with danger. "What have you done? Tell me, tell me." He grinned, blood coating his front teeth. "We have birthed a child, Zod. A boy, our son. The first natural birth seen on Krypton in over 5 centuries, with no programming to his name. He will be free. Free to forge his own destiny. Free to choose." "Heresy," Zod spat at him, before turning to Faura, who had also remained standing. "Bring that ship down." He tightened his grip as Jor-El tried to pry him off, but it was to no avail. Zod had been designed from birth as a warrior, his mind and body designed for combat and warfare. The small beard on his chin wobbled, which Jor-El knew from experience meant that he was clenching and unclenching his jaw in anger. "And Sub-Commander," he added, his voice dangerously low, "do whatever it takes. Destroy it, if you must." "At once, General." Lara moaned and attempted to rise, despite the plasma cannons that were being aimed at her, but found that her body was still too dazed, as she gripped the legs of the nearest table for support. "You knew this was coming. You could have saved Krypton. Yet you chose to save a single life. Why?" Jor-El laughed, despite the pain. Because Krypton would not listen. Because he will be a new start." He paused to spit out a mouthful of blood. "Cal can be the one to rebuild Krypton, away from the mistakes of its past. He will be the future of us all." "Where have you sent him?" "Away. Tell me." "No. Tell me." "Never." Arjh, as Zod reared back, burying the blade of his armor deep within Jor-El's stomach. It was hard to tell which one of them was more surprised. But just as soon as the expression appeared on his face, Zod schooled his features into a mask of serene calmness. "I'm sorry it came to this, old friend." "No," Jor-El gasped out, as he slid down to the floor. "You're not." "No," he agreed, stepping over his former friend's corpse. "I'm not." Jorel. Those that remained raised their weapons, but Zod waved them off. He wanted this next one for himself. The rush of stomping boots alerted him to the return of his second-in-command, and he knew from her expression that he would not like to hear what she had to say. "Report," he spoke calmly. She swallowed, momentarily nervous. The transport was dispatched and opened fire. There was an explosion, one similar to that of Contact. Lara's sobbing voice hitched behind him, but he paid it no mind. Something wasn't right, and he prompted her further. But no debris, General. No signs of the craft." "It got away," he surmised for himself, nodding, as he crouched down beside his friend's body. "Lara?" he asked gently. "Where have you sent him?" She cradled her dead husband in her arms, as she stared up at him with a venom few could manage. He would have been impressed had he not been so busy. "Make it easy. Tell me. May Rao spit on your rotting corpse." Straightening up, he nodded to himself, before blasting a hole in her midsection, where her heretical womb should reside. She screamed in pain, blood flowing freely, but summoned the strength to stare him down one final time. "You will never have him." "I will find him, Lara. I swear it. And I will take the brat's life too." "His name is Cal," she said, her voice failing her. "Son of El." She said no more. He stood still for a moment, allowing his useless grief to pass, before another explosion rocked the ground they were standing on. Lieutenant Nan rushed in, struggling for breath. "General," he snapped off a quick salute. "There are reports all over Krypton. The planet seems to be destroying itself. What do we do?" The time had come. "Restore order," he said, dismissing his men. "Faura, Namek, you're both coming with me. Nan, you have command until we return." "General." There was but a single option Zod could think of. It might not even work, but with everyone about to die, Zod knew that Krypton's greatest chance would one day come at his hands, and so, a tactical retreat was his only viable option. With his most trusted commanders at his side, the general fled. And around him, his world was torn apart. Across the universe, people and species innumerable mourned the loss of their brethren, as they looked towards the desiccated space that had once held the planet Krypton. Though they had long since isolated themselves from their peers, choosing not to interfere in the natural affairs of other worlds, they remained known through the universe as an extraordinary planet. One made up of unparalleled beauty, advanced technologies, and a civilization that had achieved many remarkable feats, ahead of many of their galactic neighbors. Its warm red star, radiant skies, crystalline landscapes, and intellectual prowess made it a beacon of hope for all who had ever gazed upon it. The inhabitants of Krypton were a people of extraordinary intellect, dedicating their lives to the pursuit of knowledge, science, and the betterment of their society. Their wisdom, innovation, and commitment to the greater good served as an inspiration for countless generations. Yet, despite their incredible achievements, their relentless pursuit of progress pushed their world to the brink of destruction, and now they would forever serve as a warning to all those whose hubris would lead them down the same perilous path. Many eyes were cast on what was now a clump and cluster of debris. However, with the explosion to mask its trail, there was a single signal missing to all. Mere minutes before the moment that shocked the universe, a single craft was able to be seen entering the planet's upper atmosphere before it vanished completely. Where it went, nobody knows. Part 2. Earth year 2211 AD. Near Endo Village, Chiba Prefecture. Planet Sol 3, local designation, Earth. The drive from her home of Tatooine in the Shizuoka Prefecture out to her mother's home in the village of Endo, in the Chiba Prefecture, took 3 hours on a perfect day, and with the amount of traffic Yokohama saw on a good day, she knew that there was no such thing as a perfect day. Inko had seen enough trauma injuries to know just how dangerous late-night driving could be, so she preferred to take her time, which almost always guaranteed a fourth hour, but she felt that the trade of slower for safer was worth it. Her car was nothing special, simply a red, older model sedan that she'd bought as a student and never had the heart to trade in for something newer. It had 4 doors, 1 engine, and it ran, which was more than enough for her needs. She'd meant to leave earlier in the day, arriving at her mother's home late enough to share dinner, but she'd agreed to cover Mila's shift at the hospital, which had then ran late thanks to a building accident, and now, instead of being late at night, it was early in the morning, having not long turned 1 o'clock, and she was still 20 minutes away from her mother's home, the same house that she'd grown up in. Her hands were clenched around the steering wheel, tight enough that her knuckles had turned white back at the hospital and remained that color ever since. Had she been calmer, she would have worried about bruising the palms of her hands. Senna. Almost 2 years they'd been together. All of that, just casually thrown away at the end of what was easily the worst week of her life. First thing on Monday morning, she found out that she'd lost out on the position of senior student nurse at her hospital, responsible for creating and overseeing the schedules for all of her peers. Chio was a lovely girl, and Inko knew that she'd do a great job. They were friends after all, but she wouldn't lie and say that she hadn't wanted the job for herself. On Thursday, she'd finally heard back from her gynecologist and received her test results. Primary ovarian insufficiency. She was, for all intents and purposes, infertile, and it was likely that she would never be able to conceive, let alone carry a child of her own. And then, earlier today, she'd been surprised when Chio had told Had that she'd just seen her girlfriend arrive. She'd been even more surprised when she'd found her and one of the new interns sharing an on-call room, with the lights out and their clothes off. She turned on her heel and walked away, ignoring the calls for her to come back, and told Chio that she was leaving for the day. Chio hadn't protested when she'd seen them trailing her, and simply told her that she was overdue to take some of her vacation time, and that she didn't want to see her in the hospital for the rest of the week. She hadn't bothered with the radio, simply driving in silence, through the forest and farmland that made up the Chiba Prefecture. She took a breath to steady herself and tried to force her body to relax. If she gripped the steering wheel any tighter, she'd tear it off of her dashboard. Away from the bright lights of the city, the only source of illumination was the meager amount provided to her by the headlights of her car, and what came from the crescent moon of the night sky. If it had been any other night or during the day, Inko knew that she wouldn't have noticed it. Had the night been cloudier, She would have assumed that it was simply a trick of the night sky, or perhaps even a shooting star. But as it was, all Inko could see was a giant ball of fire. And then, there she blinked, and there was a lot more than just the one to be seen. The pitch black of the countryside's night sky lit up, and for a moment, Inko found herself frozen, her car simply rolling down the road as she took her foot off of the accelerator, and simply watched as the largest ball of fire she'd ever seen passed almost directly overhead. So close that even in the safety of her car, she could feel the heat from it, and she continued to watch as it crashed, tearing up the field behind her, continuing to blaze. This was a bad idea, her mind told her. Things just didn't fall out of the sky, her mind told her. And when they did, you definitely didn't get up close with them, her mind told her. She turned her car towards it. Her car hadn't been designed for off-roading, and the drive was bumpy, if thankfully short. She didn't know what she expected to find when she drew closer, but a big hunk of metal wasn't it. Still dressed in a pair of white sneakers and the pale blue scrubs she'd been wearing for her hospital shift, Inko trudged her way across the field, through wet mud and destroyed pieces of trees, as her clothes grew blacker, browner, and just plain dirtier with every step she took. It was cold and dark, and a part of her just wanted to get back in the warmth of her car and continue driving, but it wasn't often that you got to see a fallen star up close, so she was curious. And that was before she heard the crying. Crying that was coming from the inside of the fallen star. Only the star wasn't a star. It was a ship, an alien spaceship. Aliens were a hotly debated topic nowadays, with quite a few people believing that they had to be real. Some people even thought that they walked among humans, blending in with the populace, or at least they had done so in the past, and that the changes made to the human DNA of their potentially hybrid children were what might have given the rest of the human race their quirks to begin with. But Inko paid no mind to any of that. The moment she heard crying, she went into what she affectionately dubbed nurse mode, moving swiftly around the ship, paying it no more mind than she would a damaged car. She located the front, where a glass bubble, or what she at least assumed was glass, was located. As if sensing her presence, the bubble split open, sending a mass of liquid splashing down around her, as the crying grew louder. It was a baby. Sitting in the middle of the glass ball, with only a white blanket wrapped around its shoulders to protect it from the elements, was a baby, crying at the top of its lungs. Inko looked at the tiny little thing, soaking wet. Its few dark curls were plastered to his, she noticed, as the blanket shifted head. Desperate to help, she reached inside and scooped him up, immediately rocking him in an attempt to calm him, and she was rewarded, not only with him quieting almost immediately, but with a look at his gorgeous green eyes, a shade of emerald much brighter than her own, that sat above a diamond-shaped cluster of freckles. He was beautiful. "Sure," she rocked him. "It's okay. It's okay. What are you doing out here all by yourself? And where are your parents?" She looked at the mass of metal in front of her. "And where are you from?" Ima Midoriya was accustomed to being woken up at odd hours of the day and night. A nurse of over 40 years' experience, Ima had seen everything and done most of it. She'd outlived her husband, who'd been gone for nearly 5 years now, and the two of them had raised a brilliant daughter, who had followed in her footsteps and become a talented nurse in her own right. A pediatric nurse choosing to work with children instead of adults, but there was no accounting for taste. She could only pass on so much. Her husband had been a journalist, and he'd always been just that bit slightly disappointed that Inko had followed her into medicine rather than following him into reporting, believing that she would have made a talented investigator, but Inko had always been at her best when she was helping people directly, and her parents had both known that. The point was, very few things in life could manage to surprise her. Which was why the pounding on her door had her on full alert the second she heard it. Cherubi immediately started barking in response, racing past her out of the bedroom and down the stairs towards the front door, and with the noise she was making, Ima was glad that she had no neighbors close enough to hear her. "I'm coming! I'm coming!" Her calls went ignored as she wrapped her fluffy brown dressing gown around her, covering his nightdress, and made her way downstairs after the dog, pausing only to slip her feet into her slippers. The pounding on the door continued, despite her calls for it to calm down, and after taking a moment to fish the right key off of her chain, she pulled open her front door and allowed her frantic daughter to barge straight past her, as the dog ran in circles around her. Honestly, she grumbled, as she shivered from the cold air that was rushing into her house. Inko, where's your key? I'm sorry, but I couldn't find it, and then he started crying and I couldn't get him to stop, and I wanted to get him out of the cold dash. He? Who is? She blinked, as she took in the bright white bundle in her daughter's arms. Inko Midoriya. That same tone had kept Inko in line as a teenager, and never once failed to convince her to tidy up the mess beneath her bed. Have you stolen a baby? Inko hadn't been pregnant. She saw her daughter at least once a month, and she might have been retired, but that didn't mean she'd gone and become simple-minded in her advancing age. What? No. I mean, it's just, I was driving, and there was a fire, and then all the water and just him in his blanket, and oh my gods, you wouldn't believe Dash. Inko Midoriya, she ground out, in a tone that often came before Inko found herself regretting everything she'd ever done. Did you steal a baby? Maybe? Maybe? She shrugged, biting her lip in worry when the baby in her hands startled. I'm not sure. Ima simply sighed, taking a seat on her sofa. Start talking. So, you were driving here? Yes, mother. And you saw a falling star? Yes, mother. Only, it wasn't a falling star. It was apparently an alien spaceship? Yes, mother. And this baby, she pointed towards the baby, who was still wrapped in his blanket, tucked into Inko's arms, was inside. Yes, mother. Then you took him out of the spaceship, realized that he was probably an alien, panicked, fled, and then decided to bring him here? Yes, mother. Well then, why didn't you just say that? She scoffed as she reached for her tea. Honestly, girl, that was much less time-consuming than your version of the story. Wouldn't you say so, dear? Inko sighed. Yes, mother. Well then, what are we waiting for? She finished the last of her tea. Give the boy here and go get your coat. Once you've done that, your father's old truck is inside the garage. You can drive. She wrinkled her nose. I never liked the drat thing. Wah, what? Mother, where are we going? We can't just leave the boy's spaceship in the middle of nowhere now, can we? We'll pile it onto the back of your father's truck and bring it here. She waved off her daughter's rising concerns. We can hide it in one of the fields out back. Mother. Honestly, dear, you really need to learn to be more articulate. You're a nurse and you should learn to speak more clearly. Tired of waiting. Ima took the baby from her grip with a practiced ease. Now, hurry up. Izuku and I are waiting. She blinked. Izuku. It didn't take them long to retrace Inko's steps. She always took the same route into Endo from Yuzudafu, and she'd driven these streets with her father so often that she often felt she could do so in her sleep, and she already knew that the particular turn-off for Izuku's spaceship would forever be ingrained into her memory. Not even a half hour had passed, and she had already changed his designation in her mind from the baby to Izuku. The Midoriya family, of which they were now the last, had often used similar names, and Inko also learned that had she been born a son, and not a daughter, her parents had planned on giving her the name Izuku, but now it was to go to the baby she'd picked up in the middle of the woods. Oh my, Ima murmured, as Inko pulled up alongside the crashed ship. Now that is impressive. And it was. The glass ball she had seen earlier wasn't a ball, she realized. Now that her adrenaline had worn off, and she'd calmed down, she could clearly see that it was instead the top half of an egg-shaped pod. The pod was encased in a pentagonal shell of a silver-gray metal that wrapped around it, which Inko assumed was designed to protect it, but with her knowledge of spacefaring vessels, it could simply have been decorative. Within the pod, which no longer held what Inko assumed was not, in fact, water, all that remained was a thick cushion layer of black, padded material. I wonder what it's made of. TT-. Ima made a clicking noise with her tongue. Most likely something we've never heard of, else our old pre-quirk space programs would have used it. She shrugged, bobbing Izuku on the nose when he started. I doubt it's made of stainless steel. The two of them paused for a moment, looking over the craft in front of them, made of a material that was quite possibly unknown to their entire planet, and despite that, they both knew they could never tell anybody. Not without putting Izuku at risk. Inko didn't quite fully understand everything that was happening, but she already knew that she wasn't going to let anything happen to him. She liked to think that the people that made up her government were nice people, the kind of people that wouldn't harm a child, but at the same time she watched the TV and heard the horror stories that had happened when quirks were first revealed. If there was even a 1% chance of that happening to this cute, innocent baby, then there was no way in hell that Inko was going to turn him in. All right, that's enough gawking. I'ma move to settle the baby. Izuku. Inko's mind corrected onto the front seat of their truck, securing him in place with a pair of crossed seatbelts. Let's get this thing loaded already. We take any longer and the main road's going to be loaded with every idiot salaryman on his way to work. Right, Inko agreed. We'll need to use our quirks though. Like that matters. No one out here can see us. We'll be fine. All right then. Inko gestured towards the main body. After you. Inko called her quirk Mini Kinesis. It was a slightly upgraded version of her mother's quirk, which granted Inko the ability to summon objects into her hand, but only if they were small in size and relatively close. Ima's version helped her to move similar objects about, but she needed physical to make physical contact to do so. She called her quirk Tactile Attraction. Neither of them were out of shape, but they lacked the physical strength required to lift the ship directly. If it weren't for the help that their quirks provided, they wouldn't have been able to load it, but as it was, it took them over 15 minutes simply to lift it and secure in their truck, which was parked less than 5 meters away. Izuku was a little saint throughout it all. She decided, barely making a peep beyond the occasional stir, settling into Ima's lap without a fuss as they drove him home. Ima made fresh tea when they returned home. The sun was still not ready to rise, but they both knew that neither one of them would be able to sleep. Izuku had awoken once they'd parked up and insisted on Inko rocking him, while she paced up and down her mother's sitting room. What do we do now? Ima chuckled, idly scratching behind Cherubi's ears. What do you want to do? Take him to an orphanage. Outraged, Inko pulled Izuku closer to her. What? No. Why not? Because he's... Ima smirked. Yes. She looked down at his smiling face as he played with the collar of her scrubs. Because he's mine. I've still got a lot of friends in medical. I can arrange for a birth certificate for the boy easily enough. We'll just register him as a home birth. No one out here knows that whether or not you're pregnant, so no one will notice. The only issue for you is back home. Senna's face flashed in front of her eyes, and it left a bad taste in her mouth. I was thinking about moving. She looked down to Izuku, who had now found the shoulder strap of her bra and seemed to be fascinated by his own attempts to grasp at the fabric. A fresh start might be nice. You'll need things. Clothes, formula, diapers, a stroller and a car seat. And that's just to start with, Ima told her, ticking them off her fingers. There's toys and vitamins and bibs and a million other things that normal people would have bought months ago. We don't even know if he can eat our food. Inko despaired. What if he starves? Oh, I know for a fact that you've got a brain in that head of yours. Girl, do try using it. Ima pinched the bridge of her nose. He can obviously eat our food and drink our water. He'll be fine. How do you know that? Ima sighed the sigh of those forced to suffer the presence of fools. Think on it. Any race capable of space travel would never send a baby out there alone, without knowing if they could survive the planet they landed on. He looks like one of us, and that's not an accident. Nor is the fact that he can breathe our air. Whoever sent him here did so knowing that he would blend in and survive. She tilted her head as she regarded her new grandson. I wouldn't be surprised if sending him here was some sort of act of desperation. So, you don't think that he might be the sign of an invasion? She clicked tongue. Invaders send soldiers, girl. They send warriors and weapons, and when they're advanced enough for space travel, I'm guessing they've got some pretty impressive weapons to match. Let me tell you what invaders don't send, babies. Right, right? Inko nodded to herself. That makes a lot of sense. Yes, I usually do. Okay then, Inko nodded to herself. Can you make some calls now, please? No, it's barely 3 a.m. Office hours don't start for another 6 hours yet. Honestly, do use your head, will you? Izuku Midoriya was born on the 15th of July 2211, according to his birth certificate, with his mother listed as Inko Midoriya, and without a father, His file simply contained a note listing his father as a man known only as Hisashi. She'd known a boy in town called Hisashi when she was younger, and she'd had quite the crush on him as a preteen, but when she was still in high school, he'd moved away for university and she hadn't seen him since. As far as names went, she supposed it would do. A notification was sent to the local registration office, along with copies of Inko's documents and updated copies of her insurance forms, which now listed her son. He was added to the Midoriya family registry, and after a visit to Ima's home from a member of the local office, which had Inko needlessly terrified, the young man that had been sent to see them spent his entire visit visibly unnerved by Ima's forceful nature, and after a shorter visit than was strictly considered appropriate, wherein he was given only the barest amount of information and browbeaten into submission, he hurried out the door, glad to be gone. And just like that, Inko had a son. Izuku Midoriya. There, through here. She looked up from where she and Izuku were sat on the floor. They'd used the day Izuku had landed as his actual birthday, but they had to assume that Izuku was a few days, if not a few weeks or months older than that. He was already capable of sitting up under his own power, whereas a newborn would still be struggling to lift his own head and learning to roll over. Her mother had chosen a pair of gray trousers and matched it with a bright yellow cardigan, while Inko had chosen a pale pink cardigan and blue skirt, in an attempt to look more normal and homely. Her mother's guest, dressed in a pale yellow polo shirt and a pair of tan trousers, was Taro Hunkao, an old friend from her days as a nurse and one of the most impressive surgeons of his time. His quirk, iridescence, had aided his career as a plastic surgeon, as he could minorly adjust the color tones of any object he was holding, and his quirk worked for materials that were both organic and synthetic. He'd often used it to adjust skin tones, shades of eye colors, and on rare occasions, hair colors all the way to the root, at the request of his patients. When Ima had called him, Taro had been confused to say the least. It wasn't uncommon for people to want to change the way they looked, or to make slight alterations to their children's coloring. He'd made a lot of money privately adjusting eye colors and skin tones for children whose parents could afford it. His quirk couldn't change a color completely, only adjust it, adding slight highlights or making slight shifts, adding bits of contrast or softening out a stronger color. It also helped his vanity. He was almost 80 years old, but he'd constantly been adjusting his hair for decades so that it kept its glossy black sheen, despite the fact that he probably should have been grayer than gray by now. Still, no-nonsense Ima was the last woman he ever expected to contact him in his retirement, asking him if he could adjust the coloring on a newborn baby boy. "Inko," Ima said, as they stepped fully into the room. "This is Dr. Hunkao. Taro, this is my daughter Inko." Inko merely waved, while Hunkao bowed in greeting, a soft smile on his face, as he registered the room's fourth occupant. "And this little man is Izuku, my grandson." "Hello there, little one, ma'am." "Doctor," Inko smiled, while Izuku's head switched back and forth between his mother and the newcomer, before he reached out, wanting her attention back, and she picked him up, tickling his tummy. As Izuku erupted into laughter, Inko rose to shake the doctor's hand, letting him get a closer look at his patient. "Thank you for coming, doctor." "Of course, it's my pleasure." He leant in for a closer examination. "And you little man, look very healthy." "Perfect health," Ima told him brusquely, half bragging, half matter of fact. "I've honestly never seen a healthier child." She shrugged. "What do you think?" "Visually, I'd agree. I'd usually like a patient chart, but I trust your judgment, Ima. If you're both ready and have somewhere we can lie him down, we can get started," he half shrugged. "I do apologize for the rush, but my wife and I are on our way to visit our sons, and we need to get going." Ima waved him off. "Don't apologize. You're the one doing us a favor." "I need to ask," Inko said. "This doesn't hurt, right? I mean, Izuku will be okay, won't he?" "With most of these adjustments," Taro began, speaking clinically in the way doctors were known to do, "even my younger patients were also undergoing other procedures and were sedated the entire time and wouldn't have felt a thing. A few of them were done on wakened patients, and they reported an itching sensation, but otherwise they were unharmed. It was worse on their eyeballs, but I'm told that won't be an issue here." Inko swallowed. "Oh, okay then." She nodded her head. "I think my mom set up a space in the kitchen?" "I did," Ima agreed, leading Hunkao by the arm. "Come, It's just through here. She'd spent a few minutes earlier that morning clearing her dining table of its usual clutter and laid out a baby mat for them to rest Izuku on. This should do nicely. After taking a moment to check that the table was sturdy, Taro turned to address the three of them. Now this won't take long, but it is draining on the body. Little Izuku will likely fuss as well, so Inko, I'll need you to try and distract him, while Ima helps hold him down, so that I can keep in contact with his hair. He glanced at the mother-daughter duo, noting the identical shades of green in their hair and in their eyes. While Izuku's eyes were a few shades brighter than theirs, his hair was completely black, without a trace of green present. It is just his hair you want doing, correct? A series of dark green highlights, the same shade of your own. Yes, thank you. Don't you dare touch those beautiful emerald orbs, Dr. Hinkao, Ima warned him. You mess with those, and my little girl might just pull your eyeballs out of your sockets. I'll consider myself warned then, he chuckled dryly, before letting them settle the boy on the table, and pressing his fingertips to the boy's hairline, preparing to brush them slowly through his locks. And here we go. Part 1. Secret Origin. Chapter 1. Inko Midoriya Origin. If I remember my history books, then the first incident happened in Qingqing City, deep in the heart of mainland China. And it changed everything. A random day, apropos of seemingly nothing, and with no external factors that could be identified, the world's most extraordinary child was simply born in an ordinary hospital, yet they were no ordinary child. Instead, they were born a child whose very skin radiated an astonishingly bright light. At first, no one knew what was happening. Local experts panicked. Scientists around the world were baffled. But then, it turned out that the baby wasn't the only one. New reports started coming in from around the world, and before the year was out, every country in the world was seeing people born with astonishing abilities. No one knew where these superpowers were coming from, but these quirks of humanity kept growing, and before long, the supernatural became the totally normal. Around us, our world had changed at its core, becoming a superhuman society, one in which people's dreams seemed to have become reality. But as these children grew, like in any other time period, some sought to use their gifts selfishly, and with the rise of superpowers came a rise in the levels of criminal activity seen around the world. While the governments of the world were stuck, trying to figure out how to reform their laws with superpowers in mind, how to adapt with the times, they saw groups of courageous people stand up and do what they felt was right. They started fighting back, performing heroic acts to defend their cities against the criminals who used their powers to do harm unto others. It became an age of heroes. And in the end, and with overwhelming public support, these heroes who had stood up to do the right thing found that they had an official place in our society as a new wave of peacekeepers overseen by the government. The heroes became pro-heroes, recognized as celebrities, and as their powers grew, and more of them rose up, so too did they grow in fame and popularity. Over time, they did more than help keep society feeling safe. They began forming their own teams, organizing themselves into ranks, and over time, they even gained their own departments in the world systems of government. Those who perform the best are paid the most, and they also gain all of the fame and glory. The careers of a pro-hero depend on their ability to stay in the spotlight, to keep the people's thoughts on them, and gain the most attention. As long as they reside in people's hearts and minds, they can grow in popularity, and as their popularity grew, so too did the desire to see their likenesses on products and merchandise, and before long, the age of heroes became synonymous with the age of celebrity. And honestly, I wouldn't say that this was necessarily a good thing. Inko Midoriya to the nurse's station. Inko Midoriya to the nurse's station. With a hum of curiosity, Inko took a few moments to finish her updates to little Saiken's record for his most recent visit, before she bustled herself away in search of whoever was at the nurse's station, calling for her. It clearly wasn't an emergency, or else they would have used her hospital-issued phone to call her directly, so she felt she was more than justified in not rushing about the hospital. She'd been a nurse at the Shizuoka Medical Center for Children for over a year now and felt as though she were finally beginning to have fully settled into her new life. Leaving the Tatoan Care Center behind had been a relatively easy decision. Chio had been equal parts apologetic and apoplectic, asking her to stay, while telling her that Darla, the nurse who she'd found Senna in bed with, would be on their nastiest cases for the next few months, clearing bowels and whatever associated messes came with them, but she hadn't raised much of a fuss when Inko had told her that she couldn't. She'd simply written Inko the nicest recommendation letter she'd ever seen, and then wished her well. A few days later, after a phone call to the Shizuoka Medical Center, she'd had an interview with their Human Resources Department as well as their chief nurse, and after confirming her payment package, benefits, and that yes, she would require use of their in-house daycare facilities, she was told that she could start with their team first thing on Monday morning. She'd been there ever since. She and Izuku had moved into her new apartment, a much nicer one within a nice school district, with 2 bedrooms, and there were plenty of other kids in the area, who he could hopefully learn to play with when he was older. It only had a communal bathroom, which she supposed wouldn't be a problem for a few years yet, as she'd grown used to the sight of the various rubber sea creatures that now lived in her bathtub. But the apartment did include its own washer-dryer machine, which she was grateful for. When she turned the last corner, stepping towards the nurse's station, she was surprised to see Ren waiting for her, with a red lotus blossom tucked into her bright green hair, which was a much lighter shade than Inko's own. Inko, she visibly sighed with relief. Thank goodness dash. Is it Izuku? Is everything all right? Her eyes took a quick scan, not finding her son anywhere, and fear seized her in a way that it hadn't since the early days, when she'd first brought him home. Where's my baby? Inko Inko, Ren reached over, placing her hands on her shoulders, as the blossom in her hair stretched open further. Calm down, little Izuku's fine, I promise, she smiled, which did nothing to reassure her. I just need you to come with me. Without explaining further, Ren turned on her heel and marched off in the direction of the daycare center, expecting and knowing that Inko would be less than 2 steps behind her. She ignored Inko's attempts to question her with an easy smile, born of working with the children of overprotective doctors and nurses, and led her through the few corridors that separated the children from the rest of the hospital. Inko blinked in confusion as she walked past the hole in the wall, before Ren led her into the room fully, where she found Izuku sitting in the middle of the room, surrounded by building blocks, as he cried. Oh, Miss Midoriya, Sakura, an elderly lady, who was one of the daycare minders, smiled at her. But Inko could see the tension behind it. Thanks goodness. Oh, sweetie. Inko scooped her baby up without a second thought, letting him rest against her, as he quieted at her touch, nestling in. What's all that noise for? Well, Sora, a member of the hospital's maintenance staff, who she just realized was also there, vaguely recognizing him from their rounds. As you can see, there was quite a bit of damage to the wall, he gestured with a nod of his head. Both to this one and the one in the corridor, he ran his hands through his hair. And we thought it was best we spoke with you as quickly as possible. Oh, did the noise upset you? She settled Izuku on her hip. Now that he seemed to have quieted completely, she gave the rest of them her full attention. Will you need to pause daycare for a few days then? Do you need help contacting other parents? I'm on shift, but I'm sure I can make some time to help, if you need it. Sora cleared his throat. I'm sorry, but what we needed to ask you about was the damages. Oh, she blinked. Well, I don't know much about walls, but if I can help, I will. Oh, well, that's not. I mean. Ren chuckled. I told you she didn't know. Sakura nodded. We both said it, she pointed out. Inko blinked, confused. I'm sorry, but know what? Miss Midoriya. He dipped his head in a pseudo-apology. Your son is the one who caused the damage. What? She spluttered, shifting Izuku into a firmer grip. Don't be ridiculous. He's just a baby. He won't even turn 3 for another few months. Yes, well, it appears then that his quirk has come in early, he shrugged, eyeing up Sakura and Ren. I'm told that it's not unheard of. Sakura shrugged. It's not common, but I wouldn't say it was extremely rare either. My Izuku did that? Threw a building block clean through one wall and halfway through the other. Sora confirmed with a nod, trying his best to not look too impressed by that fact. And it's still there. Once again, he ran one of his hands through his hair. I've called for a hammer and a chisel. See if I can't pry it loose. Well, it's pretty much stuck in there at the moment. Oh. Shizuoka Medical Center Inko was relieved to find out, fully insured against minor accidental damages resulting from quirk use within the building's boundaries, with a special circumstances clause included for the use of quirks within their daycare facilities, where their patients were even younger than the usual fare that temporarily resided within their walls. The only snag they encountered was that they apparently weren't covered for damages caused by unregistered quirks, which Izuku technically was. It was a nasty loophole in their insurance documentation, and Inko feared that she was going to have to pay for both walls to be repaired and repainted, not to mention all of the commotion it would have caused. But their argument against the hospital apparently lasted until the center's chairman called their broker, reminded him that they were a pediatric center, and threatened to cancel all of their existing contracts and recommend that others do the same, if the situation was not properly resolved. Less than a half-hour later, he received a return call, which ended without Inko having a hefty bill to pay. She did, however, donate several new sets of toy blocks to the center, made of either rubber or foam, which Run and Sakura received in good humor. It also made for a funny anecdote for them to share around the coffee carts. A few days later, when Inko brought Izuku back in for his quirk registration, the walls had been freshly plastered and painted, without seemingly any traces at all, had it not been for the faintest scent of fresh paint. Inko had been allowed to take the weekend off to look after Izuku, as had most of the staff who were left unable to use the daycare facilities, and she'd spent most of that in a blind panic. She'd been left no choice but to set up Izuku with a quirk determination exam, which she set up with Dr. Tsubasa. Dr. Tsubasa was an older gentleman, not much older than her mother, but still a far cry from the generally younger women who ran the daycare center under Sakura's guidance. But Inko had been around long enough to know the difference between a doctor who was too old to practice and refusing to retire, and a doctor who remained at his post simply because he enjoyed his work. They were led through to his office, which had walls lined with posters of pro heroes striking various poses, and Izuku was clearly fascinated by them, shaking his body, as his hands and feet did their best to help him mimic the poses. Dr. Tsubasa chuckled, his bushy mustache twitching as he did, which caused Inko to smile at the sight it made, when paired with his overly large spectacles. Right then, he flipped open her son's file, his finger tracing the words as he read them. "Let's see what we have here then." He took a quick glance at the information, nodding to himself as he went. "Ah, here we are, one Izuku Midoriya, here to see little old me for a quirk determination exam and the subsequent registration paperwork. Male, aged, oh wow, just 2 years and 10 months. He looked up at her, his eye wide behind the large circles that were his glasses. An early activator, As if response, Izuku looked up at him, waving his favorite stuffed toy in acknowledgement. "It also lists your occupation here and says that you're a pediatric nurse. Do you work at this hospital?" Inko nodded. "I do, yes." "Well, normally I'd say it's a little early for you to come in for a QDE, but chances are you'd know that. Would this, by chance, have anything to do with the recent damage done to the 4th floor?" Inko's wince was all the response he needed. "I see. Could you tell me what happened?" "Well, I wasn't there at the time, but according to his day care teachers, he was using the blocks to spell out the word, dogs dash." "Dogs?" Izuku chimed in, waving his favorite plush toy, Mr. Doggo, a bright white plush dog that he'd fallen in love with when Inko had taken him to his first winter festival, and refused to part ways with ever since. Dr. Tsubasa chuckled, ruffling his green locks, which were identical in color to hers, and Inko found herself able to relax. But another child wanted to use the block that had the letters on it. He tried taking it. Izuku tried taking it back. They snatched at it, and when he got upset with the other boy, he threw the block away. She sighed. "It went clean through the daycare's wall and got stuck in the corridor. Do you know Sora, the maintenance worker?" Dr. Tsubasa shook his head. "I know the name, but other than that, no." "Well, he had to call for a hammer and chisel to help him get the block out. It was that well embedded." She ran her hands down her face. "And then daycare got rid of all of the blocks. I donated some plush ones though, so..." "Well, based on your description, we can safely say that your son has a super strength quirk of some note, and an uncommonly strong on at that too. Your own quirk would be mini-kinesis," Inko told him. "I can attract small objects." She moved to grab his pen, reaching out and pulling back, and after a few moments, the pen in his breast pocket began to float over to her open hand in a jerking motion. "It's nothing special, but useful enough on its own, I suppose." "And the boy's father?" "I only remember that he could breathe fire," Inko told him, repeating the lie that she'd and her mother had come up with months ago. Elemental quirks were a dime a dozen, and while the really powerful ones, like Endeavors, were rare, There were almost a 100% guarantee that you could walk into a crowded room and find at least a half dozen people who could manipulate the earth, wind, fire, or water. That's quite the mutation then, he murmured, leaning forwards as he examined the boy, who looked up at him with equal interest. Well, before we start, I just need to check. He's had his shots? All up to date, Inko confirmed, having faked the results herself. Right, so we'll start with his x-rays and we'll get full body just to make sure that there's no physical mutations we're currently unaware of. We'll take his latest measurements, height, weight, and so on, check that he's growing normally, before we run some auditory and visual tests. Everything else can be covered during his general checkups. He tapped his pen against the file. And if you like, we could take a blood sample. See how that checks out. She shook her head nervously, almost frantically. Oh, no, that won't be necessary. No blood, please, thank you. Are you sure? Other than a small prick, I can assure you that it's quite painless. I'm sure. Well then, assuming that all comes back as standard then, we can register Izuku's quirk as super strength today and that'll be all there is to it. Would you like to get started? Inko smiled, relieved. Yes, thank you. Okay then, the last x-rays are in. His height and weight are close to optimal for a baby of his age. So are his eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. He punctuated each organ by tapping Izuku's, which made her son giggle, as he sat on the examination table. He hasn't said much, but we know he can speak, even if he isn't fluent just yet, he chuckled. Is he a loud crier? Oh no, not really, Inko said, thinking on it for a moment. I mean, he cries loudly enough to be heard, but even then, once he got what he was looking for, usually my attention, he would always quiet back down quickly enough. A naturally quiet baby then. He shook his head. Lucky you. Inko giggled, tickling Izuku's foot. I know. No issues sleeping or eating? When he was younger, he sounded like he had trouble breathing when he was sleeping. When was that? When he was first here, I mean just after he was born, she swallowed. For the first few months, he always sounded like he was struggling to breathe properly, but it was a lot worse when he was sleeping. She blinked away a few stray tears that threatened to fall. I used to stay awake for hours, just listening to him breathe, because if I didn't dash. You were afraid he'd stop, the doctor finished for her, looking at her with nothing but sympathy. But there have been no issues recently. Nothing after the first, I'd say 6 months or so, maybe as long as 9. I see. Well, his scans show us nothing to be worried about, but just to be safe. He removed his stethoscope from around his neck, placing the buds into his ears. Izuku, can you lift your shirt up for me, please? Yes, he confirmed with a deliberate nod, lifting his bright green t-shirt straight up over his head. Good man, the doctor replied, before pressing the flat part of it against his back. And now, can you take a deep breath and hold it for me? Izuku took as much air in as he could, and now slowly breath out, before he exhaled in one lung gust. They repeated the exercise, this time with the stethoscope on the other side of his back, before Dr. Tsubasa sat back down and told Izuku he could pull his shirt back down. Okay. Turning back to his compute, as the x-rays that they'd been waiting on arrived in his inbox, he took a moment to read the note from the radiographer, before turning back to face Inko once again. Well, everything sounds perfectly okay, and there's nothing on his x-rays to be worried about. But there was one other thing of note. Is something wrong? No, there's nothing wrong per se. He moved his mouse to double-click on one of the files, opening it fully on the screen. But they flagged a small mutation. See this here. He pointed towards the image of Izuku's foot. His foot. Specifically his 5th toe. With a few more clicks, he printed off a copy of the image and turned in his chair to face her and her son fully. See here, he tapped it a few times with his finger. This is the 5th toe, also called the outer toe or the little toe. As you can see, Izuku's toe is made up of 3 phalanx bones. The proximal, middle, and distal. 3? Shouldn't it be dash? 2? Yes, it should. You see, we still have no idea what caused the advent of quirks. Popular theories suggest that we were infected by a mouse virus, while others speculate that we've simply reached the next stage of the human evolution. There are even some people who believe that quirks came from aliens. He chuckled to himself, as he returned the x-rays to her folder. Simply ludicrous. Yes, she chuckled, wincing at how nervous she sounded. Ludicrous. Either way, he turned back to face her. There were several changes to the baseline human body that came with quirks. There used to be 4 additional teeth in the back of our mouths that often caused complications, which were called wisdom teeth. We also used to have 3 additional organs: the spleen, the gallbladder, and the appendix. I think I've heard of that last one. I'm surprised by that. Not many people bother to study the pre-quirk human body. Well, anyway, the spleen helped filter blood to aid the immune system. The gallbladder produced bile to aid digestion, and despite my studies of old texts, the appendix's function remains a mystery. The point is, they were all unnecessary and disappeared in our more streamlined bodies, for lack of a better term. And Izuku has them? No, not at all, you see. There was only one additional change. The toe, Inko guessed. Indeed, the distal and middle phalanges fused together and became a single phalanx. I simply find it odd that Izuku has 3 phalanges, despite no other change. Were it not for that, I'd tell you that he had a perfectly baseline human body. Is that bad? Bad? No, not at all, Dr. Tsubasa chuckled as he ruffled Izuku's hair one last time. But to a man such as myself, who has spent his life studying quirks for a living, I must admit that I do find its presence simply fascinating. So, there's nothing wrong with him? Not a single thing. He handed her a copy of his paperwork. In fact, there are no issues whatsoever. I'd like you to come back and see me on his 4th birthday for a re-examination, or sooner, if you notice any changes. But until then, you can use what I've given you to register his quirk as super strength, and that should cover any issues you may have had with him being unregistered. Really? That's everything? He nodded. Initial registration usually is. Now, I'm sure that you're aware that most schools ask for you to have your child take an updated QDE before entry. I am. Well, that's because quirks are difficult to diagnose in children. They have difficulty realizing what's considered baseline normal, so we ask them more questions and have them take longer tests when they're older. I expect that Izuku will need his overhauling when he's older. She blinked several times. What do you mean? While I've listed his quirk as super strength, I feel that it's most likely a mutation based on your own. It's most likely an advanced form of telekinesis, so congratulations, I suppose. Oh, I hadn't considered the similarity. Quite all right, after all, that's what I'm here for, he chuckled. After that, there's only one question left. What's that? Well, Izuku. He reached over to the glass jars he kept on his desk. Would you like a red Endeavor lollipop? Or a blue All Might lollipop? Izuku bent his head down, as Mr. Doggo whispered in his ear, and he nodded in response. All Might. He loves All Might, Inko said with a sigh, seemingly resigned to forever seeing the man's grinning face in her home. A fine choice, Dr. Tsubasa agreed, though, just for a moment, Inko could have sworn that there was a hint of distaste in his eyes, as though he were remembering something that smelled bad. But then he looked back up at her and it was gone. She didn't blame him. Between Izuku and the children's wards, she saw All Might almost everywhere she went. If she kept a jar with his face on, in her office, she'd be sick of seeing him too. Of course, registering Izuku's quirk wasn't the only hurdle they faced. They'd taken a few days off, Inko from work and Izuku from daycare, before returning on a Monday morning. Her shift went as normal, with no complications, but Izuku was noticeably subdued when she went to pick him up, trudging over to meet her hug, with Mr. Doggo trailing in his grip. Hi, sweetie, she said, as Izuku let himself be lifted up, settling into her arms, as Sakura made her way over, pausing to chat with another parent for a moment. Hi, Mama, he replied, but his tone sounded so sad that she knew something had to be wrong. Did you have fun at daycare? He shrugged and said nothing, but clutched Mr. Doggo to his chest tightly, as Sakura finally reached them. She smiled sadly, which bothered Inko more, as she lowered her voice. I think he was feeling a bit left out. Izuku shifted in her grasp, but otherwise did nothing, and Inko lowered hers to match. What do you mean? None of the other children have their quirks yet, and I think they were a little bit afraid of him. Izuku shifted again, clutching Mr. Doggo even more tightly into his chest. I had to put one in a timeout for trying to take the new blocks away from him. Oh, Izuku, she murmured, but he turned his face away. I think we should go visit Grandma, she decided, happy that she had the next 2 days off. Okay? We can go see Grandma and Cherubi. He perked up at that, always happy to be able to play with a dog, before lowering himself back down, almost immediately retuning to looking as downtrodden as any 2-year-old could manage. Sakura smiled, patting her on the shoulder as they left, and Inko resolved to visit her mother in the morning, hoping that whatever it was, they would both help Izuku get back to normal in the morning. Grandma! Inko smiled, as Izuku shot across the front of her mother's garden, until she swooped him up, making exaggerated groans as she did, while Cherubi ran around her heels excitedly, jumping up and down, before realizing she was there as well, and racing over to run circles around her. She paused for a moment to scratch behind his ears and rub his belly, before he decided that he'd been greeted properly and returned to the source of all the noise. She made sure that the car was locked before following her mother inside, who was busy tickling every inch of Izuku she could get her hands on, to pay her much notice, but she found she didn't much mind. She felt a need to speak with her mother, and while she did feel that it was urgent, Izuku was laughing for the first time since she'd picked him up at daycare, and she didn't want to stop that just yet. Changing her shoes for house slippers, she went upstairs to use the bathroom, and by the time she had come back down the stairs, her mother had already given Izuku a juice box and a biscuit and was now watching him and Mr. Doggo run around with Cherubi, using the expansive fields at the back of the house. She fixed herself a cup of tea, pouring a fresh one for her mother, before joining her at the door, just watching Izuku and his 2 favorite dogs run around. Inko didn't know how long the 2 of them stood there watching it happen, but it was long enough for the 2 of them to finish their tea and set the empty teacups down. So, what is it? I'm sorry. Ima rolled her eyes, as she turned to face her daughter. What's bothering you? You usually don't call me randomly and all but beg to be allowed to come and see me. And by the way, so long as you bring my grandson, you don't need to ask, but never mind that. Tell me, what happened? Inko sighed but truly wasn't surprised that her mother had figured out that something was wrong. Not only was it obvious, but she wasn't stupid either. His quirk came in Izuku's. Ima blinked. Oh. Yeah. He has a quirk? He does. You're sure? I am. But. I know. How? I don't know. Well, oh. Yeah. They watched Izuku and Cherubi race around for a few moments longer, stood together in silence, before Ima chuckled to herself. You should be grateful then. Whoever sent him here was either a complete genius or extremely lucky. I know that I should be grateful, she wringed her hands nervously, but I'm still worried. Welcome to parenthood, her mother muttered dryly. Sorry, she swallowed. It's just, won't he stand out? Doubtful, Ima shrugged. What's his quirk? Apparently, he's really strong. He managed to throw a toy block through one wall and into another, she sighed. I had to have them examine him. We registered his quirk as super strength, but they know mine and I listed his father as having a fire-breathing 1 dash. Smart. Ima nodded. Fire quirks are everywhere. That's what I thought, Inko agreed. But neither of them lead to super strength. It's too obviously different. Someone will know something's up. Pish. Ima waved away her concerns. Random mutations pop up all the time. I remember 15% of all quirks being mutations. 12.87%, Inko corrected. And quirkless are at what? 20. 20.13, but that's overall. In Izuku's generation, it's now less than 9-inch, she sighed. And those are the worldwide numbers. A few of the Nordic countries still have numbers that are much higher than the rest of the world, but just in Japan, it's now under 3% in his generation, and that's taking into account rural areas where the numbers are always a bit higher too. Tokyo reported less than 50 births last year. Yokohama, Osaka, and Nagoya each had less than 20-inch. She shook her head. Sapporo and Kawasaki both reported none. See? Having no quirk would have made him stand out far more than having one. Even a mutate between generations is easier to explain, because last I checked, no one knows what causes them unless that's changed. Inko shook her head. Whoever chose to send him must have been beyond clever. Even genius is too small a word. What do you mean? A body that's at least externally identical to the human body, capable of eating our food, drinking our water, breathing our air, and has its own form of a quirk to go along with it. It's not just externally. What isn't? His body. All of his bones and organs line up with ours as well. Or at least they look like they do. They took X-rays as part of his QDE, just to see if he had any mutant properties, and when I thought about getting them, I thought, that's great, because I could pass any differences off as part of his quirk, make them list it as a mutation. Smart thinking. Well, with only a single exception, he has a perfectly baseline human body. Same bone structure, same organ layout. Remarkable, I'm amused. And as I said, simply genius. She turned to face her daughter fully, curiosity played out across her face. What was the exception? His small toe. His toes. Inko smiled softly. Just the one or two, I suppose. He has 3 phalanges in his small toes. Ima blinked several times in succession. That's it. That's it, Inko confirmed. But everything else? Perfectly in line with our own, she shook her head. Sometimes, I wonder if I dreamed up the entire ship. If I hadn't seen it crashing for myself, I don't think I'd believe it. It is fascinating, Ima agreed, as she watched Cherubi tackle Izuku, licking his face and covering him in slobber, as the boy erupted into giggles, scratching at the dog's ears and belly. But it also tells us that whatever physical differences exist between us and the boy can probably only be found on the cellular level. Inko smiled as she watched her son play. That makes sense, she mused. It also means that it's all on you. She frowned. What do you mean? Whoever sent him here must have known that he would be able to blend in. Yet they sent him here alone, and other than that thing we've shoved into the old barn, there's nothing about him that screams alien at you. Either they had no chance to include anything, or they simply didn't want to. There are a few symbols etched within the thing, but unless he was born with knowledge, which I doubt, there's no way he can learn to read them. Unless you decide otherwise, all Izuku will ever know will be us. Whatever little he can learn about who he is and where he comes from is all going to be on you. Not you. Ima shook her head. No, that's not my place. I'm his grandmother, not his mother. I had my go, she smiled, cupping her daughter's face for a moment. And I raised a good girl, who became a brilliant woman dash. MOOM. Ima just continued to smile. You're old enough now to make your own decisions. Your own choices, and I'm sorry, but as scary as it is, being a parent means making choices for your son too. She looked over to where Izuku and Cherubi were rolling about, getting filthy and covering themselves in mud. I don't know if I'm ready for that. No mother is. Hell, no parent is. All we do is guess, and then we fret, and then we worry, and after all that, we realize that all we can do is make it up as we go along. You can ask for advice, take help when it's offered, or go it alone. But in the end, as the parent, it's all your decision. But you'll be here to help? Well, naturally, dear. Part 1, Secret Origin. Chapter 2, Kaken. Some days, Inko felt as though her nerves would never be able to settle back down again. It had all started on the day she'd chosen to adopt the alien baby that she'd found in the woods as her own son. She'd taken one look at the adorable little emerald orbs he had for eyes, each one so similar to her own, and simply fallen in love with him then and there. There were always horror stories about what the governments of the world did with special children, whether they were children with quirks that were notably strong at birth, quirks deemed to be dangerous, or simply those they felt that they could one day make use of for the good of their country. The Japanese government was no exception to this. While no cases had ever actually been proven as being true, at least not in Japan anyway, there were far too many rumors abound for her to ever dismiss the idea in its entirety, and the mere sliver of a thought about what they might be willing to do, if they ever discovered that an alien walked among them, made her shiver with fear. She would have thought that taking the child in Izuku, she'd named him, would have been the most harrowing part of claiming him, but her nerves never seemed to be allowed long enough to properly rest. First, it had been the act of claiming him for her own. She'd spent the first few weeks terrified that a group of soldiers would show up on her doorstep, kicking it down, before they came in and took him from her. She'd done everything she could to create a paper trail for her son, one that was as impeccable as she could make it, including moving apartments, faking the idea of having a home birth to register him with a hospital that wasn't local to her new address, and asking her mother to arrange for a retired plastic surgeon friend of hers to make one last house call to alter his hair color. Second had been the sleepless nights. There had to be something in the air, something that Earth had that Izuku's homeworld, wherever that was, simply didn't, or vice versa. She was still learning everything she could about being a mother, and a single mother at that, but she'd set the cot up in the corner of her bedroom, where she could keep him close. She'd thought that by keeping him close, that he'd be safe, but that hadn't helped when she'd listened to him sleep. Each and every breath he took caused a strain on his tiny little body, making each movement a struggle, a painful intake followed by an exhale of relief, only for the cycle to repeat itself over and over again, as she wondered if each breath that he managed to take would end up being his last. Third had been his quirk. She'd never have imagined that Izuku would develop a quirk of his own. Truth be told, she hadn't really taken the time to consider the idea of a quirk at all, far too worried by everything else in their lives that could go wrong to focus on that particular fact. The idea of Izuku developing, or as she would have expected, not developing a quirk of his own was a problem for the future. It was something she could worry about explaining when Izuku reached his 5th birthday without one appearing. Yet apparently that wasn't a problem she was ever going to have. Her son had a quirk. Should she even be calling it a quirk if she didn't even know if this was the norm? Was it possible that all of his people had quirks the same way humans did? Or maybe they all had the same abilities, each one of them being as strong as her son was and would be? Or maybe it was something that was unique to Izuku, possibly even the reason he had been sent here, cast away from his family? Either way, she supposed that it didn't matter. Her son had a quirk, and it was already apparent that the quirk was going to make him quite powerful, and there was the strong possibility that it might grow even stronger as he grew older. Many other quirks did, after all. And just like that, she was worried about her first set of concerns all over again. Despite the worst of her worries, however, no nameless, faceless government agent in sunglasses and a plain black suit had arrived on her doorstep, so she'd taken the next frightening step in Izuku's development: enrolling him in their local preschool. "I'm sorry, but it's Midori, isn't it?" Inko blinked as she turned to face the newcomer, who, like her, also seemed to have her son with her. "Ah, it's Midoriya, actually." She offered a brief bow in greeting, which was quickly returned. "I'm sorry, but have we met?" "Oh, right, yes, you probably don't remember me." She offered her an apologetic smile. "I mean, you probably see a few hundred people a week. I'm Mitsuki. Mitsuki Bakugo." She pulled forward the small child beside her, who looked to be identical to her in almost every way. "And this is my son, Katsuki. You were his nurse when he went in for his last checkup?" She chuckled, confusing her for a moment. "I don't think I've ever seen Cats behave himself so well before. It made quite the impression, let me tell you." Inko smiled. "Well, I'm glad everything went well." She tried to pull Izuku in front of her, but one hand had a death grip on her trousers, while the other clutched Mr. Doggo to his chest. "Izuku, would you like to say hello to Katsuki?" "Hello," he murmured, still not moving from behind her. "Come on, brat." For a moment, Inko thought she should be concerned at the other woman's harsh choice of words, but the man now stood behind her, a placid-looking gentleman that Inko assumed was her husband, just sighed, with a fond smile on his lips, as he guided the younger boy forwards, which made her think that this might have been a common occurrence. "Say hello, Cats." "Hello." The boy scuffed one of his shoes against the ground. "Can we go now?" "No, son," the man told the boy, looking amused at his son's sullenness, and based on their non-reactions, Inko assumed that this was also common enough behavior from him. "Oh, right, this is my husband, Masaru. Masaru, this is Inko Midoriya. She was Katsuki's nurse when I took him in for his last checkup. The aunt I told you about." She bowed, as the woman's husband did the same. "It's nice to meet you." He smiled, still looking completely at ease. "You as well. I remember Mitsuki telling me that one of the nurses managed to make him behave himself for an entire minute." He eyed his son, still amused, who scoffed in response. "You have to tell us how you did it. We're completely hopeless with him." "Nonsense," she smiled, liking the pair already. I'm sure Katsuki's a lovely boy, aren't you? The boy responding by grumbling, as he continued scuffing his shoe against the ground. And this is Izuku, she told him, trying to push him forward, but he was stubbornly keeping one arm hooked around her leg. Go on, sweetie. Say hello to the Bakugos. Slowly, still clutching Mr. Doggo in his other arm, Izuku let go of her for a moment, offering a quick bow of his own, as he all but whispered the word, hello, before stepping back behind her. He's adorable, Mitsuki whispered to her. She grinned, I know, before losing the grin when she looked over at the clock hung on the nearby wall. Okay, Izuku, it's time now. No, he said, clutching her leg, and she held back the urge to wince at the tightness of his grip. Don't leave. Come on now, sweetie, we talked about this. He gripped her leg tighter, and she sighed, as she did her best to kneel down and pry his hold on her leg loose. His quirk, thankfully, seemed to wax and wane depending on the day. Sometimes he would break things by accident, simply by attempting to pick them up. Other times he could drop, throw, and squeeze others, but nothing else would happen. While it was possible that Izuku simply didn't understand how to activate his powers, she had the sneaking suspicion that it was actually all in his head, and control over his super strength would come with age. After all, despite the fact that he'd managed to break 2 walls, 2 chairs, a table leg and several dishes, as well as tear several towels in half and a tablecloth, somehow Mr. Doggo had managed to remain in perfect health, despite being the one object Izuku kept with him at all times. Which reminded her. Now, Koharu-sensei's going to look after you, just until I come back, okay? Izuku shook his head. No. Sighing, she managed to pry his grip loose long enough to kneel down in front of him, and plucked Mr. Doggo from his hands as well, tucking him into the space between her t-shirt and her cardigan, just out of reach from his ability to grab at it. Look at me, Izuku. She waited a moment, until he looked up at her, and she ran her hands over his hair. Trust me, this can be a lot of fun. You can make friends, like Katsuki here, and play and learn. Like with Miss Sakura? His voice was small, scared even, but she smiled. Yes, just like with Miss Sakura, and that was fun, wasn't it? She paused for a moment, waiting, but eventually he nodded. See, now I'll take Mr. Doggo with me for safety, and then when you're all done, we can both come and pick you up, okay? He eyed Mr. Doggo longingly, but slowly nodded, okay. Now give me a kiss goodbye. Izuku flung himself at her, and she didn't hesitate to catch him, letting him hug her for far longer than she normally would have, had it been any other day. Instead, she held him there for a while, as the elder Bakugos attempted to do the same with their son, but who seemed stubbornly against it. She remembered him from his checkup visit now. His appearance hadn't stood out to her, but she remembered his attitude now. He'd spent the entire visit staring at the poster of All Might up on the wall, after she'd told him that even All Might had to get his checkups done too. If it was good enough for All Might, then it was good enough for him, and he hadn't even flinched. He was a brave kid. Now go make friends, okay? Little Bakugo shrugged at his mother's suggestion. Kay, why don't you go ask Izuku if he'd like to be friends? I bet he'd like to play with you. That sounds lovely, Inko agreed. Izuku, would you like to play with Katsuki? Slowly, he nodded. Okay. Reluctantly, he pulled back from her, letting her go, but before he could hunch up on himself, she kissed his cheeks, as he squirmed, looking as embarrassed as most of the other children in the room, as their parents did the same to them. It was hard not to cry. Izuku, not unlike her, had a very expressive face, always seeming to have every emotion, no matter how minute, clearly visible on his features, and as she left him for his first day of preschool, she could see all of his anxiety at being left behind, and she worried for a moment that he would start crying, and if he started crying, then she knew that she would start crying too. So, as they left the children behind, Mitsuki sidled up beside her, her husband Masaru following dutifully behind her. If you don't mind, I have a question? She eyed her warily, worried about what the unusually forward woman might ask her. Yes. Is it true that one of the kids in the hospital managed to tear down an entire wall? Inko couldn't prevent the groan from escaping her lips. no matter how hard she tried to stop it. For the love of no. He didn't tear down a wall, he just put a hole in some of them. Yes, they needed to close the daycare while they fixed it, but I offered to help. You offered to? Her voice trailed off, as Mitsuki's eyes widened in realization, before flicking between Inko and the side, off in the direction of the school. No, but he's so cute and quiet. He's not even my son, and I wanted to give him a hug. He managed to break walls, as in more than one. Inko couldn't help it. She groaned again, as Mitsuki's hand shot out, taking Inko by hers, as she began marching them off. Wait, where are we going? We're going to get tea, Mitsuki told her, not bothering to ask for permission. And then I want to hear all about how that sweet little boy of yours managed to physically destroy a bunch of walls. It was only 2, she protested. Yeah, you're not making this story sound any less interesting, the other woman told her. Now come on, let's get something to drink before I make you spill everything. And I had no idea. Masaru, having only grown more amused as the tale went on, raised his eyebrows, even as he lifted his tea to his lips. None at all. No, I just thought they needed my help with the rest of the children. And meanwhile, your son had casually tossed a building block through the wall? Yes. You have to admit, Mitsuki said, setting her own cup down. It does sound a little odd, especially at that age. Inko sighed. Believe me, I know. Hell of a quirk though, Masaru mused. And so different from yours too. Actually, the doctor thought that it might be an advanced form of telekinesis through physical contact, so maybe not so much, but who knows? Cool, Mitsuki grinned. Not every day a quirk like that pops up. Indeed not, Masaru agreed. If I remember rightly, the old saying is, quirks are bullshit, isn't it? For some reason, while she could imagine Mitsuki cussing out an entire squadron of sailors, the sound of the polite and affable Masaru doing the same caused her to giggle, but she managed to compose herself quickly and found herself asking, Trust me, you only hear about the good ones. Doctors and nurses, we see far weirder things than you ever get told. I'll bet. I can only imagine. Despite herself, Inko smiled. What are your quirks, if you don't mind me asking? Mine's called glycerin, and as you can see, Mitsuki waved a hand in front of her face. It replaces my sweat with glycerin. For this most part, it just helps constantly moisturize my skin. Keeps me looking young dash. And beautiful, Masaru interjected. Mitsuki smiled gently, the softest expression Inko had seen on the other woman's face yet. I work as a model, so I won't lie say and it doesn't help. Masaru's actually a fashion photographer. That's how we met. Cam and Lottie's fall collection, Masaru mused. I remember it well. It was one of my first jobs, and I almost set fire to one of the dresses. If an angel hadn't appeared out of nowhere to help me, I would have been fired for sure. Inko chuckled. You set fire to a dress? Almost, he laughed along with her. My quirk is acid sweat, and don't worry, it's very mild, but I was nervous that day, so I kept fidgeting, despite the fact that enough friction can cause the acid to combust, and when it eventually did, a few of the sparks got onto one of the dresses. He shuddered. Thankfully no one noticed before the shoot was over, and even then, they blamed it on heat from the lighting equipment. They never knew it was you? No idea, he shrugged. The second we were done, I all but ran away. I'm just really glad that girl who helped me made me stop long enough to give me her number. He reached across the table, threading his fingers with his wife's. Who knows how things would have turned out if she hadn't. That's a lovely story, she told the Bakugos, meaning every word of it. Even sat across the table from them. She could see and feel the love they had for each other. She wished she had something like that. Is there no Mr. Midoriya? She did her best to smile and not panic, aware that Mitsuki was looking at her hands, as she held her cup up, examining her fingers for a ring, and shook her head. No, I didn't know Izuku's father very long. We weren't even dating and neither of us wanted to stay in contact. Does he know? About Izuku? She shook her head again. No, I didn't know until he'd been gone for weeks. I keep an eye out, and if I ever see him again, I'll let him know, but it's just the two of us. And you're new here, right? Newish, she agreed. I moved here for the job and liked it enough that we chose to stay. I'm from Endo originally. Well, that settles it, Mitsuki decided. You have to let me show you around. I'll help you find all the best spots to get your hair and nails done, and we can go shopping. I've needed to for a while, and retail therapy should always be done with a friend. There was a gleam in Mitsuki's eyes that Inko felt she should be afraid of. Let's hope the brats get along. That way, we can let Masaru babysit while we go out dash. You do realize that when I'm with Katsuki, it's called parenting, not babysitting, right? Shush dear, and we can enjoy a girl's day out. You should be allowed to have fun too. What do you think? I mean, it does sound nice, she agreed, but work keeps me pretty busy. Mitsuki scoffed, please, so long as I'm not on a shoot, I'm always able to make myself free, so don't worry about that. You, me, a girl's day out. What do you say? It had quickly become obvious to her that Mitsuki Bakugo was not a woman to be taken lightly. I think that sounds wonderful. Masaru, you're babysitting. He sighed. Yes, dear. The first day of preschool was only a half day, compared to the full day that the others would be, and between worrying about Izuku and chatting with her new friends, Mitsuki and Masaru, Inko found that the wait quickly passed, and before long, the three adults were returning to the school to pick up their sons. Peeking in, Inko relaxed when she was able to lay eyes on Izuku for the first time in 3 hours, and was happy to find that he was doing okay. He'd calmed down, and was sat beside Katsuki at one of the tiny tables, the two of them seemingly fully engrossed with their coloring in. Izuku had chosen a seat at the edge of the table, and Katsuki had apparently chosen to sit next to him, but there was a gap between him and the next child, as the two boys seemed to be sharing a pot of crayons between the two of them. Well, my brat's not trying to kill anyone, Mitsuki mused, turning back to face her husband, and he's playing with that adorable little boy. We'll call today a win. Masaru sighed, while Inko couldn't stop herself from giggling, as the two boys traded colors, with Izuku swapping his red crayon for Katsuki's blue one. It looks like he made a friend, she said, intending to say it in her head, but instead she said it aloud, and the Bakugos nodded. Yes, it looks like they both did. Somehow, Mitsuki couldn't help but add under her breath. They watched them for a few minutes, as the boys sat beside each other and continued to color in, before Koharu-sensei called for everyone to come and sit together. They couldn't hear her through the doors, but the children all made their way over to where she was stood, forming a circle around her. She gave them a stern look as she spoke, before the children returned to where they had been, and tidied up, putting their crayons and chairs away, as the few of them who had been drawing and coloring together picked up their drawings. Around the room, Inko saw others putting books and toys away, before everyone returned to their place in the circle. Once again, she couldn't hear what she was saying, but she did see her bow, before all of the children copied the motion, and then one of the teaching assistants opened the doors. The children grabbed their coats and ran out to greet their parents. Izuku was no exception, and she braced herself for his grip, as he tackled her legs, hugging her knees. She picked him up, glad to see for herself that he was all right, and hadn't worried too much after she'd left. Apparently, she needn't have worried, because Izuku was grinning when she picked him up, before he gasped. Mr. Doggo! As Izuku swiped his best friend from the pocket of her coat, and immediately launched into the thrilling tale of his day, which was apparently spent drawing pictures of All Might, including the one that he pressed into her hands. As he regaled his stuffed toy, little Katsuki strolled out of the school, and she fought back her chuckle at his childish strut, having apparently decided that he was too cool to run with the other children, before he handed his mother his own picture of All Might. After admiring it for a moment, she handed it to Masaru, who was made to solemnly promise that he would keep it safe until they got home. She shared an amused farewell with both Bakugos, promising Mitsuki that they would have their girls' day out, the next time that Inko managed to get a day off from the hospital, before they both nudged their son forwards. Go on, cats. Be nice. Say goodbye to Izuku. Inko didn't know that a child that young could look so exasperated, but Katsuki managed it, as he threw his head back, looking and sounding bored. Goodbye, Izuku. For his part, Izuku didn't seem to be bothered by his new friend's attitude, as he and Mr. Doggo waved back frantically. Bye cats, bye catty catsy. Izuku scrunched up his nose in concentration. By Kakin, I'll see you tomorrow. Don't call me that. Hi Kakin. Don't call me Kakin. Bye Kakin. That's not my name. Now say goodbye to Izuku and Inko, son. He huffed. Goodbye. Goodbye Katsuki. Bye Kakin. I said don't call me that. Grandmama. Grandmama. Who's making all that racket this early in the morning? No doubt worried at being scolded, Inko watched, utterly amused, as Izuku slowed his run down to a brisk walk and ceased his yelling, as the two of them rounded the side of his grandmother's house, where they found Ima and Cherubi sat out on the back porch together. Cherubi, no doubt having perked up at the sound of Izuku's voice, immediately bounded over as they approached, his tail wagging behind him, barking his greeting, as he began running circles around them, only pausing when Izuku reached down to scratch his ears, before he rolled onto his back to demand a belly rub. Well then, Ima made a show of staring them down, while Inko hung back, content to let her have her fun. Who are you? And why are you here? Izuku grinned, showing off all of his pearly white teeth. It's me, Grandmama. Mama and I came to visit. Ima just shook her head. The only person who calls me Grandmama is Izuku, my grandson. That's me. No, it's not. Yes, I am. Ima sniffed. You can't be my grandson. Izuku scowled. But I am, Grandmama, promise. I think so, you see. Grinning as Izuku looked away, Ima reached over and swept him up, her fingers immediately finding his tummy for a round of tickling. My grandson's not nearly this tall, but he is ticklish. Inko couldn't have stopped herself from smiling if she tried. Not that she did, but who could blame her? Seeing your mother tickling your son senseless. As he squirmed to get away from her, pearls of laughter escaping him with every breath he took. It didn't last forever, thankfully, no matter how adorable the sight was. All right, you two, settle down. She plucked a still giggling Izuku from her mother's grip, idly wondering how her mother managed to still lift him so easily, especially at her age. Even with the use of her quirk, Izuku wasn't as light as he used to be. Her boy was growing up so fast. Izuku, why don't you tell Grandma about your time at school? She gently bounced him on her lap, as Cherubi trotted back over to them, laying down beside his owner. And you can tell her all about your new friend. Oh, did you make a friend, sweetie? Yeah, Kakin. Inko smiled. His name's Katsuki. They met on the first day of preschool, and they've been getting along since, she told her mother, happy to have something good to tell her about Izuku's experiences. Whenever she called her mother for parenting advice, or just to talk about what had been happening, it felt as though she never had anything to say that she could consider positive. Most of their talks always seemed to be about what had made her worried that week, and what she feared might happen next because of it. Her son making a friend was a nice change of pace. You made a friend, sweetie? Izuku nodded his head, and Ima smiled. Well, go on then. Tell me about him. Is he nice? Izuku tilted his head. As he thought about it for a moment, no. Hi, Kakin. There was a sigh, one that shouldn't come from the mouth of any child, but Inko recognized it for what it was. A sigh of defeat. Good morning, Izuku. Part 1, Secret Origin. Chapter 3, The Boys. There was nothing special about that day, but when he looked back, Izuku would remember it clearly. The day everything began to change. It wasn't a quick change. It wasn't some form of quick strike and instantly, everything was different. It wasn't carried out with speed of a gunshot, but was instead, it was done slowly, one small piece at a time, vanishing and changing, and the one day he realized that there was very little left. Still, despite that, he knew exactly when it had started. Izuku would remember the date even years later. The year was 2215. The month was April. The date was the 11th. And it was a Tuesday. Kakin's birthday was next week, and Izuku was excited about it. He was going to be 4 already, and Uncle Masaru and Auntie Mitsuki had been busy planning an all-might-themed birthday party for him, and he and all of their friends from class had been invited to it. Mama had helped him pick out Kakin's birthday present, and they had gone out to the big shops at the weekend to buy it. It was only April, but the day itself was sunny, more so than usual, and it was particularly warm, which was probably what helped it happen that day. The day started the same as any other. Good morning, Izuku. Hi, Kaken. Don't call me that. He and Kaken had said hello to each other at the school gates before going inside with Koharu-sensei. They were learning more numbers today, which was fun. They sat in a circle together and practiced counting. As they played, pass the ball. When he'd started school, Mama had made him promise that he'd be careful when he had to move things, and Koharu-sensei said he wasn't allowed to throw it too hard. He might hurt someone. He didn't want to anyone. All Might didn't hurt people, and he was the strongest person ever. If he had to be careful, then Izuku would be too. When Lia passed the ball to him and it was his turn to answer, he did, but instead of throwing it, he just handed the ball to Kaken. They were stood next to each other in the circle, so all he had to do was turn to him and hold out his hand. Okay, Katsuki, pass the ball to someone else. Kaken chose to give the ball to Saran, who was on the opposite side of the circle from them, throwing it as hard as he could, and as the ball left his hands, Izuku's eyes stung. His nose burned at the smell, and he clamped his hands over his ears, the noise piercing his skull, leaving the faintest ringing in its wake. Blinking away his tears, he saw that others were looking the same way he was, crouched and hunched over, as they also tried to protect their hearing. Across the room, Saran had been sick. The ball had hit him in the stomach badly, and now he was crying. What happened, he wondered for a moment, before he turned to face Kaken, who was still staring at his hands. He'd thrown the ball, but as he let go, his hand had exploded. And just like that, everything around them changed. Wow! That's so cool. So powerful. That's such a cool quirk. It's the perfect quirk for a pro hero. And then Kaken threw the ball, but his hand went boom, and Izuku cheerfully recounted his story to his mom, while she carefully checked his ears. It was so bright and loud. Yes, sweetie, I know. Now hold still for a moment. She tilted his head and checked inside his ear, but frowned at what she saw. Nothing. There was nothing wrong with her son. That shouldn't have been possible. Human beings had developed more robust bodies in the years since quirks had become commonplace. The presence of even trace amounts of quirk factors seemed to increase the body's durability, and that was without counting those who had actual musculoskeletal reinforcements as part of their quirk. It seemed as though young Katsuki's body was reinforced to help deal with his explosion quirk, with one noticeable improvement being that his eyes and ears had developed in a way that meant they were adapted to survive proximity with constant and repeated exposure to his explosions. He wouldn't have to worry about going blind or deaf simply from using of his quirk. When the hospital had been contacted to expect a mass influx of students who had been in close proximity to an explosion, Inko had felt her heart leap into her throat. The full explanation hadn't done much to soothe her fears, nor the myriad of other worried parents that had convened at the hospital, but being able to examine the children had started to put them all back at ease. Dr. Tsubasa had personally seen to Katsuki and said about registering his quirk, with Inko's knowledge coming of the regular updates Mitsuki was sending to her phone. The hospital had sent a pair of plastic surgery residents down to examine the children's ears, helping to determine if anyone had any serious damage. There had been a bit of blood, a lot of ringing and plenty of dizziness, but so far, it seemed as though no one needed to be taken in and prepped for a moringoplasty. Inko thanked the heavens for small mercies. She and a few of the other nurses had helped the surgeons with the more pressing exams, but then had taken over for the obviously less serious cases, which thankfully included Izuku. She'd taken over his exam herself, but she hadn't found anything wrong with him, which just didn't make any sense. She'd seen the results of her son's incredible strength, and she knew enough about quirks to know that it stood to reason that there would be some element of enhanced durability to go along with it, to stop big or heavy objects from hurting him, but still, this was something else. The teachers had said that Izuku was stood next to Katsuki, to neither her nor the Bakugo's surprise, and by that, he should have had the worst of it. The loudest part of the bang, the harshest flash of the light, but apparently Izuku was completely fine. His exam showed no sign of damage, his ears were fine, as were his eyes, and he reported no problems with his hearing or his vision either. Enhanced durability was one thing. This was something else entirely. Nothing. She shook her head. Nothing. Not even a bit of redness from inflammation. Pain. No. Ringing. No. Pus. No. Blood. No. Earache. No. She tapped her fingers on her porch railings as she tried to remember symptoms. Elevated temperature? Inko smiled, even as she shook her head, as cool as ever. Just what kind of power does he have? Some kind of overall body enhancement, I suppose. She leaned over, resting her forearms on the railings. But a lot of those get stronger as the users get older, but that's assuming his body works the same as a normal human's. And he's already so strong. I'm amused before shrugging. Or at least he's supposed to be. Not that I've ever seen. Honestly, if it wasn't for the one incident with the building block, and that one time he lifted my entire sofa above his head, I wouldn't know he had it either. Age-related growth, I would assume. Probably, she sighed. It's more common, but static would be easier to deal with. Trust me, children are never easy to deal with. Oh, believe me, mother, I know. Stretched out in front of them, the two women watched on in silence as Izuku played with Shirubi, throwing his favorite ball about the garden and letting him fetch it, before turning it into a brief game of tug-of-war, only to start the entire process again. He wants to be a hero. It was the first time she'd ever said the words out loud. Izuku adored heroes, and he especially loved All Might. He had toys and posters galore, and he and little Katsuki were forever drawing pictures of them all. Even now, at least a half-dozen of them were magnetically attached to her refrigerator, and she was quite certain that all of them featured the world's symbol of peace and justice in some form of fashion. Izuku and Katsuki both idolized the man, and Inko could see why. He was brave, courageous, and forthright, and he gave off an air of victory, no matter what he was doing. He was a symbol of the best qualities that mankind had to offer, and had influenced children worldwide into doing their best, going beyond and being plus ultra. And Izuku wanted that too. He wanted to help save people with a fearless smile, and with his strength and apparent durability, Inko knew that he would be a good fit for the profession one day, and the more she realized that fact, the more it terrified her. Because being a pro-hero, especially one like All Might, meant being exposed. It meant people everywhere, not just in Japan, but all around the world having their eyes on you. And what if someone realized what he was? They'd come and they'd take her baby away from her. And she'd be powerless to stop them. No one, not even All Might himself, had the power to take on the entire world. And when that day came, and if Izuku tried to walk that path, Inko knew that it just might, then she knew she'd lose that fight. She wouldn't stand a chance. Yes, you will, Ima told her, and she winced. Apparently, she still needed to work on her mumbling habit. Her mother chuckled. I haven't heard you do that since you were what, 17, 18? Since before nursing school anyway. It must really be weighing on you. What if they dash? Let me stop you right there, sweetie. She knocked their shoulders together. Don't start asking yourself what if when it comes to your children, or you'll never be calm again. Just deal with the facts of the matter. He wants to be a hero. It's dangerous for more than just the usual reasons in his case. You don't want him to. He has a decade before he begins looking at schools. Just let him be a boy. Let him live in Fantasyland and grow up a little more, before you start trying to turn him into an accountant, or maybe a doctor. How about a lawyer? Inko teased. That would work too, Ima agreed, watching as Izuku threw the ball too far, and it tumbled under her husband's old truck. Something nice and respectable, at least with good money. You can get him a nice suit, two-piece, in black or light gray. Not blue. Ugh. Not with our hair color. Izuku scrambled to help Shirubi reach for the ball he'd thrown, but it was apparently too far under the truck for him to reach, and she nudged Inko's attention towards it. Hang on a moment, sweetie. We'll help you get it. Izuku turned to face them. It's okay, Mama. We got it. Ima was just about to dispute that fact, not seeing the ball in his hand or Shirubi's mouth, when Izuku moved from his position lying down to crouching, and firmly gripped the front bumper. For as long as she continued to live, Ima would never forget the sight of her 3-year-old grandson lifting the front of her husband's old truck clearly above his head. Shirubi, Izuku said, without a hint of strain in his tone. Fetch! The dog darted in, and after a moment, returned with her favorite blue ball in her mouth, and her tail wagging happily behind her. She dropped the ball, slick with saliva, at Izuku's feet, as he lowered the truck back down to the floor, letting it drop it the last few centimeters. Come on, Cherubi. Fetch! He threw the ball again, and ran with the dog, chasing after it, and he probably needed supervision, but all Ima could focus on was her husband's old truck, which had stopped moving now, and was once again completely stationary. So, he's strong. Yeah. Overall body enhancement though, so he's durable too. Yeah. How about that? Yeah. Happy birthday, Kakin. A tired sigh, which Inko couldn't help but be amused by, escaped a pair of young lips, as, sharing her grin with Mitsuki over the top of their heads, the Bakugos welcomed them for little Katsuki's birthday party. I told you not to call me that. The birthday boy then offered them a formal bow, which they returned. Please come in. Izuku helped up the box he'd carried in, wrapped carefully in smiling all-might faces. We brought you a present. Katsuki thanked them both for the present, offering them a formal bow, before offering them both a party hat. Inko politely declined, needing to leave shortly to begin her shift, but Izuku happily took one. The hats were all-might blue, with his red and white diamond symbol around the middle, and naturally, Inko couldn't help but think, were complete with 2 golden spikes of hair, sticking up from the front of the hat. Inko left the boys to it for a moment, as Katsuki showed Izuku where he could put his jacket away and took the coffee Mitsuki was already handing her. How's he been? With his quirk? The nurse in her was curious. She'd heard tales from nurses of children who panicked when given abilities that had the potential to frighten them, but she had a feeling that Katsuki would prove himself more resilient than most. You mean Mr. Explosion down there? She shrugged, even if there was a faint smile on her lips. Loud, mostly. Well, louder than usual at any rate. He tried using his quirk for fun, but we ended that when he tried to make his own toast with it. Inko grinned. He didn't. Burnt breadcrumbs all over my kitchen. The woman shook her head. What about you and little Zuku? Did you enjoy your weekend trip to see your mother? I did, yes. And Izuku's always happy to see Cherubi, if not Grandma herself. Well, that's nice. My parents are both gone, and Masaru's live too far away for anything other than a proper trip. I remember you saying they lived in Imabetsu, right? Right up north, yeah, she sighed, taking a sip with her coffee. But never mind that. How was your trip to Grandma's house? Fine, like I said. He likes it up there. Grandma likes seeing him, and he'll take any excuse to play with a dog. Mitsuki smiled. Apartment too small for a puppy? Banned by the building, Inko told her. And if we ever move, I just need to make sure that the next one is too, or I'll end up finding myself with a dozen strays living out of my bathtub. Mitsuki snorted. I can just imagine him looking up at you, those big expressive eyes while he cuddles them all. She shook her head. He'd never let me get rid of them. Inko and her 100 Dalmatians. Izuku and his 100 Dalmatians, she corrected. Inko's not walking and feeding them. You don't want to play fetch all day long? Mitsuki teased. Not a chance, she shook her head, before brightening up. But that does remind me. How would you like to hear the latest tale in my story of the sun with super strength? Mitsuki's eyes lit up. Newer than lifting up your table? My sofa, she corrected. Right, right, Mitsuki waved it off, eager for the good gossip. Well, come on. Tell me already, what did he do now? He played fetch with Cherubi, and after a while, they managed to get the ball to roll underneath by Father's old truck. I already love where this is going. It was pretty far in there, so I told him to wait a minute and we'd help him get it. She shook her head. All he does is turn back to look at me and go, "It's okay, we got it." And then, casual as you like, grabs the truck by its front bumper and lifts the entire front half straight up, above his head. Ha! Mitsuki erupted into giggles. Course he did. Let me guess. They got the ball back and went back to playing, like nothing had happened. She shrugged. Yeah, But at least his grandma finally got to see his quirk in action. Inko smiled as her son clambered into his safety seat, taking care to properly buckle himself in under her watchful eye. "Did you have a nice time at the party, Izuku?" "Yeah," he sat back against his seat, and she dutifully handed over Mr. Doggo, who Izuku immediately tucked into his side, and she couldn't help but notice his response was at odds with the upset expression on his face. "Are you okay, sweetie?" "Yeah." She reached behind her, the fingers of her left hand toying with the hem of his trousers. "Did something happen? Would you like to talk about it?" He sighed. "No, Mama." She wiggled his foot. "Okay, shall we go then?" "Yes, please." "Good morning, Kakin." "Good morning, Ku." Inko blinked, as there was a cackle of noise and light, and after a moment, she realized that it had been little Katsuki, using his quirk in the palm of his hand. "Stop that," his mother hissed, quickly running some of the wet wipes that her husband handed her over his palms to remove any smoke residue. The smoke was a light whitish gray in color, instead of a more worrying hue of dark gray and black, wafting up away from his skin. And while the nurse and Inko screamed out for her to pin his hands down and make sure he was safe, the annoyed expression that Mitsuki spouted made her think that the youngest Bakugo had spent the weekend testing out his new ability. "Long weekend." Mitsuki glowered. "You don't know the half of it?" She shuddered. "Let's just say that burnt breadcrumbs are the least of our concerns." "That bad?" "He ruined my favorite tablecloth." "I'm sorry. Masaru's mother gave it to us as an anniversary gift 1 year. "Oh." "It had a print that was identical to the one we had at our wedding." "And now there are burnt handprints right in the middle of it." She winced. "So, we've decided to swap to paper ones." "That sounds sensible." Mitsuki sighed, pinching the bridge between her nose, while Masaru moved to keep a better eye on the boys, who were now standing with a group of other children. "I just want to get through today without any issues." She rolled her shoulders, and Inko noted, not for the first time, just how tense she seemed. He keeps trying to find excuses to get away with using his quirk, and if he doesn't learn to knock it on the head now dash. "He might never," Inko finished for her, understanding her concerns. "Makes me grateful that Izuku's strength seems to come and go. Hopefully, by the time he's old enough to control it properly, he'll be so used to not having it that he won't think to use it. If only we were all so lucky." When he had accidentally thrown a block through the wall at the hospital, Mama had sat down with him and made him promise to never ever use his strength against other people for fun. Only real pro-heroes like All Might were allowed to use their powers, and then only against villains, and if All Might wasn't allowed to use his powers against his friends, then he wasn't allowed to either. That made sense to him. "I promise," he'd said, and he'd been very careful since. Just like she asked, he never threw things or tried to pick up the big things. Koharu-sensei always told him he was doing a good job when he handed people things instead of throwing them, or placing them down gently, and Izuku knew that that was a good thing. He didn't think Kakin knew it though. He kept clapping his hands together and making them go, boom, even though other people didn't like it. Zia had big ears, like a bunny, and it was hurting her. She kept putting her hands over them when she heard the boom, but Kakin just laughed. "Heroes need to be tough, Ku," Kakin told him, and he nodded because heroes did need to be tough. If she wants to be a hero, then she needs to be tougher. That made sense too, but what if she doesn't want to be a hero? Kakin laughed. "Everyone wants to be a hero, don't you?" He did, but he didn't want to be mean to Zia either or anyone else. "Come on, Ku. Let's go play heroes, and I'm gonna be All Might." Karen hit the floor rolling as Kakin took the ball from her, and when she sat up, her glasses were wonky on her face, and she looked sad. "You need to be faster," Kakin told her. "Heroes need to be fast." Izuku ran back when he heard Jimu yelling. They were playing heroes and villains, and it was Jimu's turn to play the hero, while the rest of them went and hid. They'd only been playing for a few minutes when Izuku heard him yelling. He'd ran back over to make sure that he was okay, only to find him on the floor, while Kakin stood over him. "You're cheating." Kakin scoffed. "What kind of hero can't beat the villains?" "I found you, you're out." "You didn't beat me though." "I found you." It doesn't matter if I won though. Kakin, he said, not wanting anyone to fight. If Jimu found you, you're out. He scowled. Whatever. I want to play something else. Heroes are always strong, so they always win, Kakin told him as Lee ran away. And I'm strong, so I always win. You're being mean. Kakin stamped his feet. That kid had a weak quirk, and he was a wimp and a crybaby, so I made sure he knew his place. Izuku stood up and walked away as he started looking for his mama. Where are you going? I don't want to play anymore. I'm going home. Well, tell the extra to get out of my way. Stop it. You're being mean. I'm being a hero. What are you doing? I don't want to play with you anymore. Kakin, stop it. The boy in question just scoffed in response. Get out of the way, Ku. You're being mean. Their moms had taken them to the park, while Uncle Masaru was busy editing his new photographs. Izuku was sitting in the sandbox when he looked up and saw Bolin running away because his brother Mako was being picked on by 3 other boys. Izuku recognized all 3 of them from his class, but it was his best friend that stood out from the rest of them. He looked around for his mama or Aunt Mitsuki, but he couldn't see them anywhere. And Mako was crying. Say sorry, Kakin yelled, as he pushed Mako back over, his hands lighting up with the power of his quirk, as he grabbed at Mako's arms. Enough was enough. That's enough. He didn't like shouting, but this time he needed to. The 4 other boys turned to look at him as he stomped over and did his best not to trip over his own feet. Ku! Kakin rolled his eyes. What are you doing? I'm here to help. Ha! He turned back to look at Mako. See, now you have to say sorry. I didn't come to help you, he said, looking past him towards Mako, who was clutching his arm. Are you okay? Mako nodded slowly, but that was enough for Kakin, who stepped between them. Why are you helping him? He deserves it, the boy huffed. And someone needs to teach him to get off the swings when it's my turn. You're acting like a bully, Kakin, and you need to stop. I'm not acting like a bully. Yes, you are, he pointed at Mako. He's already crying, and I won't let you hurt him anymore. You won't let me? Ha! Kakin laughed at him, while their other friends nodded along. You can't stop me. See? Kakin stepped forwards, his hands bright and shining, cackling with his quirk, as he made to grab Izuku's jacket. Behind him, Tsubasa flapped his big red wings, and Nobunga made his fingers grow as long as his forearms, bending them until they looked like claws. He ignored the other 2, but Kakin wouldn't let him ignore him. He ran up to him, grabbing him by his jacket, and set off his quirk. Ah! It hurt. His quirk, explosion, detonated against his skin. It was hot and felt like he was being pinched 100 times at the same time. Not so tough now, are ya? Kakin laughed, as the smoke in front of him cleared, revealing the ruined shirt he was now wearing and the marks on his favorite jacket. Mr. Doggo tumbled out, no longer tucked away in his inner pocket, but before he could collect him, Kakin snapped him up. PFF, Kakin held him up by his neck. You're too old for toys, he shrugged. You should get rid of him. Then, with Mr. Doggo still secure in his grip, Bakugo let loose his quirk. Grandmama had bought him Mr. Doggo when she told him that she couldn't let him take Shirubi home with him because he wasn't allowed in the big cities. She'd made him promise to look after Mr. Doggo instead, and he had. He'd promised her, and then he'd looked after Mr. Doggo. He cleaned him, took him everywhere they went together as a walk, and played with him all of the time. And now? He sniffed, trying to stop himself from crying like a baby, and stood up, ignoring Mako as he ran away to find his brother and father, and all he felt was angry. He took Mr. Doggo from Bakugo's hand. He reached out, grabbing his wrist and squeezing tightly, until Bakugo let go of Mr. Doggo with a gasp. Snatching him from the air, he tucked him safely away inside his jacket, before letting go of his arm to zip himself up properly. He should have stopped there. Izuku should have stopped there. But he was so angry. His friend was being mean for no reason, and now he had hurt Mr. Doggo too. He waited for Bakugo to stand back up, and when he did, he was angry too. "Ku!" he managed to ground out. "You're fucking dead!" He lashed out, his hand lighting up with an explosive punch, but Izuku decided no more, and as Bakugo stepped forwards, he shoved him in the chest with all of the strength he had and sent him flying backwards. He breathed out, heavily, his anger dissipating with a sense of satisfaction, as Kaken flew through the air, and kept flying. He hadn't meant to push him that far. He just kept going. He went past the sandbox and the swings and even the slide. There was a big tree in the park. There were lots of trees, actually, but this was one of the biggest, with bright pink petals at the top. And then he slammed into it. The trunk splintered and shattered, as pink petals rained down around him. The tree creaked, squeaked and groaned, before it gave way to gravity and tipped over. And then the yelling started. What the hell was that? Oh my God! The tree! The tree! Quick! Get the kids! Someone's been hurt. Call 119. Oh my God! That's blood. We need an ambulance. Izuku? Katsuki? That's my son. Move, Katsuki. Katsuki. Part 1, Secret Origin. Chapter 4, Deku. And remember Dash. To be careful. Yes, Mom. I know. He finished buttoning up his collar, before adding under his breath. You remind me often enough. What was that, sweetie? Nothing, Mom. That's what I thought, she said dryly, as she stepped around the corner, already wearing her pale blue nurse's scrubs. Are you ready? He nodded. I'm ready. His mom wore plain white orthopedic trainers for work, allowing her to walk and run comfortably as needed, while his choice was a bit more fun. Aldera Junior High School mandated its Gakurin uniform, but it had no strict guidelines on its students' choice of footwear, which meant that Izuku was allowed to wear his classic Air Might Series XX trainers, in bright red with white lining, without any issues. Then let's go. They both put on their shoes, his mother doubly making sure that she had tightened her laces, knowing that they could become a safety hazard, as they stepped outside and she locked the door behind them, before they headed down the apartment stairs and towards the car. It was part of their routine now. Every morning, they left their small apartment together and piled into his mom's even smaller car, which served to make him feel more and more cramped, the older and taller he got. Mom would drop him off at Aldera Junior High School for his day before she continued on to the hospital. Once school was out, Izuku would take the train up to the hospital and spend a few hours of his time volunteering. They'd eat dinner together in the hospital cafeteria, which thankfully had nice food, before her 12-hour shift was over and they'd drive home. It was a nice routine. There was only a single blight in it, as far as Izuku was concerned. Aldera Junior High School. Izuku really didn't like that place. He'd said he hated it once, but his mother had been insistent that he didn't. Hatred was a real emotion, she'd told him, a raw one that ate at you, leaving only pain and anger behind, and if you didn't actually feel it, then you shouldn't say that you did. Now that he was 13, he knew his mom had a point. Hatred and anger could be dangerous, and when you were as strong as Izuku was, you had to be careful. He'd used his powers against someone angrily once before. He promised his mom and his grandmama, and himself, that he'd never let it happen again. Good morning, Izuku. Good morning. Hey, man. Hey. Hi, Izuku. Hi, Sen. Izuku smiled as he took his seat in his homeroom class, setting out his notebook and pencils, and setting them down neatly. Hamura-sensei gave him a nod in greeting as he sat down, from where he was enjoying his morning coffee at the front of the room. A few of their other classmates joined them, as the time for morning bell grew closer and closer. Some of them were content to ignore him, while a few others waved in greeting or simply nodded. Izuku liked most of his classmates well enough, but given that he spent all of his free time volunteering at the hospital, he couldn't really say that any of them were good friends. He just didn't know them well enough. Or rather, he only really knew one of them at all. With all of the casual force his arms were capable of, Bakugo threw open the door, letting it slam against the adjacent wall, before he wheeled himself inside, with all of the anger his body could muster. Years ago, He had used to call Bakugo Kakin. Back then, they'd been friends, best friends, before one day when they had gotten into a children's spat, and after Bakugo had damaged his favorite toy, Izuku had lost his temper. He'd shoved Bakugo with all of the force he could muster, which for him was quite a lot to consider, and the result had thrown him clear across the park they'd been in. Bakugo had collided with a cherry blossom tree, and as the trunk had shattered on impact, so too had Bakugo's spine. He'd lost consciousness and blood, and 3 of his milk teeth, but the doctors had managed to stabilize him. They'd done everything they could to save him, and they'd succeeded, but after weeks of rest, recuperation and recovery, it had become clear that while most of Bakugo would be just fine, he would never regain the full use of his legs. And it was his fault. Mom had warned him about using his strength. Grandmama had warned him about using his strength. Koharu-sensei had warned him about using his strength. Dr. Tsubasa had warned him against using his strength. And he hadn't listened. He'd gotten angry, he'd used his strength, and Bakugo had been the one to pay the price for it. The police had been called, naturally, after a child was traumatically injured, but there was nothing that could be done about it. The age of criminality in Japan was 14, and Izuku had only been 4 at the time. Even if it hadn't been an accident, he simply wasn't old enough to be charged with a crime, so there was no legal punishment for it. There'd been a lawsuit, he remembered being mentioned, but he was old enough now to know that it had been a civil lawsuit, and not a criminal one, between the Bakugo family and his mom, who was legally responsible for him and any actions he took. He didn't know what the outcome was. His mom had never actually told him about the lawsuit, but he assumed that it hadn't ended well, because what he did know was that they hadn't spoken since. Before he'd hurt Bakugo that day, their moms had been friends, and good friends at that. He could remember calling Mitsuki and Masaru auntie and uncle, and he knew that Bakugo had done the same for his mom, calling her Auntie Inko. He'd spent his time at their house instead of at the hospital's daycare, during the times when his mom had been looking to picking up extra shifts. Naturally, that had all changed on the day he'd crippled their son. Understandably, in his mind, they had no desire to see him or to look after him following the incident, so he'd spent his free time either sitting in the hospital daycare, helping with the daycare as he got older, and then, when he'd gotten old enough to properly assist the staff, earning himself community service hours, which would look good on his application to UA in a few years, and which he desperately needed, given that he had no extracurricular activities that he could list on his forms. UA wasn't just one of the few national hero schools in the world, and only one of 2 that could be found in Japan. It was considered to be the school to go to. Their entrance requirements were the strictest in all of Japan, and that was just to be given permission to take the exam. They produced internationally ranked pro heroes and were responsible for the training of more than one national number 1 pro hero. They were considered to have the finest heroics course in the world for a reason. Their exams were held under secrecy agreements, changing their layout once every 4 years, and the few people that had attempted to circumvent their agreements had found themselves quickly silenced and prosecuted, as UA sought to prevent future leaks by coming down extremely hard on those that spoke out. Each of the standard subjects required for UA had their own individual paper-based exams. Japanese language, mathematics, science, social studies, English, and ethics. Those exams lasted an hour each, and then, if you scored well enough on those, you would be invited back for the second set of exams a few weeks later. As a prospective heroics course student, Izuku would have to be invited back to take the heroics exam, which was a practical exam, and only if he managed to score high enough on the exam to score within the top 36 standard applicants would he be offered a place at UA in the next year alongside the 4 students that were admitted on recommendation. The processes for the students that had been recommended to UA by past alumni were supposedly different than UA's usual admissions process, but there was next to no information available about them online. All he could find was a single note in UA's academic policies that stated that their alumni were only permitted to make a single recommendation, with no exceptions, for the duration of their career. The additional exam for the support courses was also a practical exam. He knew, while the exams for any of UA's standard education courses were additional paper-based exams. The business courses was more in-depth and harder to get into again, as the prospective students had to submit a portfolio of work, and if the competition was particularly fierce, could be called in to defend it. And he only had 2 years to prepare himself for it. If he was serious about gaining admittance into UA, then he needed to start preparing this year. His school marks were top tier. He and his mom had both noticed that he seemed to have perfect recall when he focused, which made school a lot easier, and he had his work at the hospital to supplement his application, but if he wanted to pass the practical exam, then he probably needed to find a way to safely train his quirk too. There were a few registered quirk gyms in the city, 7 in total. He knew he'd checked, but they were expensive, ridiculously so, and he already knew without asking that his mother couldn't afford to pay for one. Izuku didn't consider himself to have ever been lacking for anything, but he couldn't say that, growing up, money had ever been something that they'd had plenty of. He'd heard about the cheaper, underground options, but they were not only inherently more dangerous, but they were also illegal, and if he was caught in one, then he could kiss his UA dream goodbye before it ever got started. There were probably a few public places that he could get away with practicing control over his strength, but if he was seen doing so by the police, then they'd put unlicensed public quirk use of his record, and again he could say goodbye to UA before he ever stepped foot in there. No, he needed to find some other way of doing things, in a manner that wouldn't get him arrested with a juvenile record. Besides his potential admission into UA, if he ever got in trouble with the police, his mother would flip out. She already worried about him too much as it was. "Ria, is anyone in there? Midoriya?" He blinked and realized that Hamura-sensei was calling his name. "I'm sorry, Hamura-sensei. I must have drifted off for a moment." "It's roll call, Midoriya. I know it's probably not the most exciting part of your day, but do try and pay attention." He felt his cheeks flush in embarrassment. "Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. And Air? Present. Thank you. Muna? Present. Thank you. Nori." With his thanks, Izuku took his lunch tray and looked around for a place to sit. There was a mostly empty table towards the front of the room, so he made his way over and sat on the edge, nodding briefly at his 2 upperclassmen, who ignored him. He drank his miso soup down quickly, savoring the taste, before moving on to his salad with shredded chicken. He had just finished the last of it, leaving himself only with an apple and what remained of his bottled milk, when he felt him behind him. "Move. You're in my spot." He took a breath. "Hello, Bakugo. I said move." "You're welcome to sit down, wherever you like." "I like it here. Move." He bit back the urge to sigh, and simply slid himself over a seat, moving his tray with him. "There you go, Kakin." He smiled brightly, knowing how much it would irritate him, while Bakugo's 2 lackeys, ever present behind him, snickered at the sound of his childhood kenning, which only served to bother him more. Growling, Bakugo's hand snapped out towards the glass bottle of his milk, but Izuku's reaction was faster, and he clamped his hand around the other boy's wrist. The moment he did, he felt his hands begin to heat up in his grip, while freaky fingers and wings both took a step forwards, looming over his shoulders. The boys had names, but ever since they'd started hanging around with Bakugo, nobody bothered to use them anymore, instead using the same nicknames he did for his lackeys. He eyed the duo, but neither made to move any further than they already had, while Bakugo wrenched his arm free of his grip, and Izuku moved his tray further from the boy's reach. When I said move, Bakugo leant in, using the admittedly rather impressive strength of his arms to push himself up from his chair. "I meant get off the table, bastard." He chuckled. "I'm sorry, but is that meant to be an insult? So, I don't have a father, who cares? Apparently your slut of a mother doesn't." Izuku didn't remember standing up, but a moment later, he was stood over Bakugo, with the collar of his jacket firmly in his grip and the pointed knuckles of his fingers pressing against his windpipe. Freaky fingers and wings both took a step backwards, startled by his movement, as the lunchroom fell silent, until you could hear the creaking of Izuku's fist as his grip tightened. "Go on then, do it," Bakugo whispered, his amused anger lacing every word he spoke. "If you think you've finally got the balls, take a fucking swing, Deku." He took a deep breath through his nose, exhaling slowly, audibly, though his mouth, before he loosened his grip, letting Bakugo drop the 6 inches back into his chair. "Yeah," Bakugo smirked. "That's what I thought," he scoffed. "Wants to be a hero, doesn't even have the balls to throw a fucking punch." Defensive Izuku. "All you're good for is standing there and taking a beating." He pushed himself up, trying to draw himself up so that they were eye to eye, but scowling when he failed, as Izuku refused to lower himself down to speak to him. Now get off my fucking table. Gritting his teeth, Izuku moved. Where is he? Bastard can't have gotten far. Come on, boys. It's time for quirk practice. Deku, where are you? Izuku ducked into the nearest classroom, as Bakugo and his usual gang of lackeys passed him by. Freaky Fingers and Wings had apparently been joined by Stretchy Eyes and Beaky, and the fivesome were looking to use him to practice their quirks on. Between his durability and his inability to hit them back without potentially killing them, they felt he made for the ideal target, but the desire burned within him to just strike back. Just once. That's all it would take. One solid blow from him to just one of them, and he knew that none of them would ever bother him again. And yet, if he did, he didn't know if he would be able to stop himself from hurting them. So instead, he sat down against the empty classroom's wall and waited. He counted to 10 in the comfort of his own mind, taking a breath in between each number, and once he hit 10, he poked his head outside, making sure that the coast was temporarily clear. He tried asking the faculty for help before, but none of them wanted to be seen disciplining the kid in the wheelchair, especially with such a powerful quirk, who had already stated his desire to enter UA, and smart as he was, Izuku had to admit that Bakugo had a good chance of making it too. All of which meant that Izuku was on his own. Thankfully, he just needed to make it outside, to one of the spots that didn't have a camera without being seen, and then he could be off to meet his mother at the hospital without anyone being any the wiser. It had been a day just like this one, when he had first discovered his power. Freaky Fingers and Wings had managed to find him out near the kitchens, and Bakugo had followed, lighting up his palms in anticipation, when Izuku had managed to get away. He slipped out that same set of doors now, and after checking that none of the school staff were nearby, tightened the straps of his bag and tucked his jacket into his trousers. Deku! There he is. Hey Deku, just wait up a minute. Yeah, we just want to talk. He'd fallen for that one before, more than once actually, but now he knew better and simply didn't bother turning back around. See you later, boys, he called out, before focusing, taking one step forwards, and then he ran. Around him, people seemed to slow down, moving at less than a quarter of their normal speed, as Izuku ran past them. Some of them were able to make him out, as he ran towards the train station, but others simply didn't notice, too consumed by their phones and tablets, missing his presence entirely, as he raced past them at a superhuman speed. Weaving in and out of people, he checked the traffic at the crossings before he raced across the road, double-checking that no one had accidentally stepped out into it, before he crossed through the children's park and ducked in at the side of the station. He gave himself a quick pat down, making sure that the friction hadn't set fire to his bag, jacket, or trousers again, before slipping his train pass out of his pocket. Hi, Suro. Good afternoon, Midoriya. The laid-back operator checked as Izuku scanned his pass, the screen lighting up green. All right, go on. He smiled. I'll see you tomorrow. Yeah, same time, same place, now go on, before you miss your train. He looked down and saw that his train was pulling into a stop, and immediately took off running at a normal pace, down the stairs. By Suro! He shook his head, as he turned his attention back to the phone he had hidden beneath his desk. Crazy kids. His mom had been a nurse at Shizuoka Medical Center for as long as Izuku could remember. He'd grown up in the hospital, and in that time he'd seen his mom go from being a standard apprentice nurse to a registered nurse who was helping to supervise her department, to being the deputy chief nurse, helping to coordinate all of the hospital nurses. He was really proud of her. He knew that it wasn't easy, being a single mother and working a full-time job, working in 12-hour shifts with barely enough time for a nap squeezed in. He did everything he could to make it easier for her, but he also knew that she worried about him, especially when she couldn't see him. The accident with his quirk had been nearly 8 years ago, but he knew that, like him, she remained worried that something like it would happen again. And that wasn't something he could wave off. There was no obvious solution. Hi Izuku, Mari? The ever-cheerful receptionist greeted him with a happy wave of her orange-skinned hand. Where are you working today? I'm on meal deliveries, he told her as he signed himself in. So I'll be up and about for the rest of the afternoon. Busy day. She shrugged. No more so than usual. That's good news. Yep, she replied cheerfully, popping the pea as she spoke. Now get up there. Hungry folks won't feed themselves, you know? You just want me to sneak you down some coffee and cake, he teased, and was rewarded with her orange cheeks flushing a brilliant shade of red. You're so mean. Even when I bring you down free dessert? Love you. Making his way into the changing rooms, he nodded in greeting at the nurses he recognized, while he headed towards his mother's locker. Stowing his backpack inside, he slipped off his school jacket, leaving him only in his white shirt, black trousers, and bright red Air Might sneakers. He pulled out the hospital coat that his mom's coworkers had gotten for him as a gag gift, slipping it over his shoulders, before pinning his ID card to his belt and giving him the look of a hospital worker. He made his way to the hospital kitchen, where he found a cart already waiting for him, with the last meals being piled on top. With a brief thanks, he stepped up behind it and began his day's rounds. Making his way through the wards, he delivered the meals one tray at a time, always doing his best to take a moment to chat with the children, especially if they weren't with their parents at the time, not wanting any of them to feel lonely. His mother had told him once that it was the children without regular visitors that she worried about the most. Teenagers were the most likely to tell their parents not to come and visit, but his mom said that it was the ones with parents that showed up every day that seemed to heal her better. And if the parents weren't there, then it was up to the nurses to look after them, and as far as Izuku was concerned, if he was there to help the nurses, then it was up to him as well. In between delivering trays, he asked the kids about their recovery, made sure that they were comfortable, looked over the schoolwork they'd been provided, and helped some of the younger ones with their drawings. He made sure that everyone had at least one drawing pinned to the wall. When his deliveries were done, he circled back around, this time taking away the trays and leftovers, before he returned them to the kitchens and then went to meet up with his mother for dinner. She was waiting for him in the cafeteria, nursing a cup of coffee in her hands, but smiled tiredly when she saw him. She rose to meet him, letting him greet her with a kiss to her cheek, before they joined the queue for food. Izuku had read a lot about enhancement quirks over the years. It turned out that a lot of them needed rather significant caloric intakes to function properly, and as his own strength had always seemed to come and go randomly, Izuku had once thought he had the same issue, and had spent one long weekend indulging in as many calories as he could physically manage. It turned out that his quirk simply needed to grow with his body, and all he had succeeded in doing was making himself feel sick, much to his mother's exasperated amusement. She'd had a lot of fun telling Grandmama the story too. It had been a long time since he'd seen her laugh so much. "Are you okay, sweetie?" "I'm fine, Mom." "Izuku," she warned, "I know when something's bothering you. Now, come on, spill." He didn't know why he bothered trying to hide anything from his mother. Not only did she know him better than anyone else, but she also spent most of her time around children, almost all of whom tried to hide something from her at some point. In short, she could read him like a book. "I'm just thinking about school," he told her. "School? Huh." She took a sip of her coffee. "Did something happen with Katsuki?" "Nope." "Uh-huh," she said, in a tone that indicated just how little she believed him. "What happened?" "Nothing," he sighed. "I was just thinking about high school." When she raised an eyebrow, he rushed to add, "I'm serious. I was just thinking about my application to UA and my lack of extracurriculars. Spending some of my free time working here helps fill a gap in my application, but I don't really do much," he shrugged. "I was just trying to figure out what else I could do to pad things out." Hidden behind the rim of her cup, Inko bit her lip, watching Izuku as he tucked into his rice bowl. The discussion about her not wanting Izuku to apply to a heroics course had come up only once before, when Izuku had been younger, and seemingly been ignored by him since. The closer they got to the time for Izuku to start making his high school applications, the more worried she became. Izuku taking any entrance exam meant exposing himself to the scrutiny of pro-heroes and the government. Scrutiny meant that there was a risk of his origins being discovered, and if that happened, she knew that she wouldn't be enough to protect him. "Well, imagine you had to go and get a normal job." Izuku frowned. "What would you want to be doing?" "I don't know," he mused, slowly chewing on a piece of his pork. "I like talking with the kids about their quirks," he began, talking out his reasoning outside of his own head. "It's fun. making up scenarios about how they could be used or what you could do with them. I just don't see how to turn that into something, though. What about something to do with the news? He blinked. What? Inko smiled. You're always reading one of your hero news sites, and I know you read more than one, she told, not bothering to let him contest it. They must have all sorts of writers and researchers working for them, not to mention the press agents that work at agencies and for major outlets, she watched as he blinked rapidly, catching up to her understanding. You could work for one of those. We do have a school news site, Izuka mused. I mean, some of it's just the actual school news. The lunch menu, staff updates, exam dates, but they do run features on local heroes and quirk exams. I could try volunteering for it. Her smile grew wider. That's the spirit. Excuse me, Juden-san? Just Juden's fine, he responded, without looking up from his computer screen. Who's asking? It's me, Midoriya, from class. I wanted to talk to you. Oh, he span around on his chair. What's up? I want to volunteer. Volunteer? For the school news site? The office said I should speak to you. Oh, sorry. I can't remember the last time someone wanted to volunteer here. He reached up, scratching behind his head, which was topped with shockingly orange hair. It's not exactly glamorous. Izuka smiled. That's okay. To be honest, this was kinda my mom's idea. What? Why? Well, I'm going to apply for UA at the end of the year and sign up for their entrance exams. Cool. Yeah, but I was worried about my extracurriculars. I volunteer at the hospital, but I was worried about it not being enough, so she asked me what kind of thing I'd want to do for a living if I don't get in. I told her that I like talking about quirks and how they can be used, and the different pro heroes, and then we got to the idea of the press. Juden nodded. And the school news site. Yep. Well, great, he tapped his desk, and Izuka realized that there was a camera set down atop it, and it wasn't the cheap disposable kind. It was one of the really expensive ones, which came with all kinds of different lenses and were usually only ever used by real, serious press photographers. I could really use the help. Is there a lot to do? Not really, but it's not really my thing. Izuka blinked. You're on the school news team. You are the school news team, but you don't like doing it? I like the press stuff, he admitted, but I'm in it for the photography. That's my dream, to be a real pro hero news photographer. To go where the action is and see it all firsthand. To help document history. I figured being on the school news team would be a good start, but turns out it's now just me. Once the others realized that I actually wanted to do this for a career and wouldn't quit, they realized that they could. That's awful. Yeah, and the worst part is that I hate the writing. I really just want to take the photographs. Sounds like you could use a hand. He grinned. You any good at the whole writing thing? Top of my class with a near-perfect score. You're in. Great, he held out his hand. Izuku Midoriya. You can use either name, he shrugged. I don't mind. He took the hand. Jimu Juden, but my friends can call me JJ. All right then, JJ. Where do we need to start? All Might's Aldera Rescue. Symbol of Peace saves student. Written by Izuku Midoriya. Photographs by Jimu Juden. Wednesday, April 20th, 2225. In a breathtaking display of heroism, the world's symbol of peace and justice, All Might. Rank. Number 1. Peak. Number 1. Arrived in our fair city yesterday afternoon, just in time to thwart a villain's desperate attempt to evade justice, and proceeded to not only capture the villain, but also rescue a young boy in distress. The incident unfolded yesterday afternoon in the bustling streets of Mizudafu, as fear threatened to take hold of those nearby. Eyewitnesses reported a terrifying encounter between a formidable villain, referred to as the Sludge Villain, real name unknown, and the young student, who had been caught in his vile grip. The underage student cannot be named for legal reasons. But just when hope seemed dim, the resounding cry of "I am here" shattered the tension, and All Might, our symbol of peace, descended upon the scene. With his unmatched power and unwavering determination, All Might swiftly sprang into action, unleashing a powerful blow that shattered the villain's grip and saved the young boy. In the aftermath of the confrontation, Mizutofu residents breathed a collective sigh of relief as the villain was quick to surrender, and upon his detainment, All Might was quick to leave the scene, no doubt vanishing in search of the next crisis that required his attention. Also on scene were the Pro Heroes, Backdraft, Rank, number 161, Peak, number 84, and Death Arms, Rank, number 177, Peak, number 91, as well as newcomers, Kamui Woods and Mount Lady, previously unranked, as well as several sidekicks belonging to the Strong Arm Agency. Reports from the local pediatric trauma center have informed us that, though they were visibly shaken by the ordeal, the young student in question was able to emerge unharmed thanks to the timely intervention of the world's greatest hero. Authorities were quick to commend All Might for his swift and decisive action in neutralizing the threat posed by the sludge villain and preventing the loss of civilian life. As the sun sets on yet another day in Mizutofu, citizens should rest easy, knowing that our beloved symbol of peace stands by, ever vigilant, ready to defend our homes against all those who would threaten to do us harm. I think this is some of our best work yet. Yeah, when I showed it to my mom, she printed out a copy. She sent the link to my grandma and had the printed copy of it framed for me. My mom did that too. She sent a copy of our article to my grandma? Huh, I didn't even know they knew each other. Juden chuckled, knocking their shoulders together. She had it put in a frame for me, idiot. I told her that I thought it was the best article we've done together, and definitely my favorite 1-inch, he shrugged. So she printed it and had it put in a frame for me, mounted it on card and everything. Hey, that's what my mom did. They probably did it together. He let out a content sigh as he looked down at the article again, enjoying seeing his photographs alongside every word Izuku had written. I don't suppose you know how Bakugo and his pets liked being featured on our school's news site? Well, I haven't spoken to any of them, but I did see them scowling at anyone who so much as looked at them while holding a phone in their hands. He sighed, but unlike Juden's, it lacked any of his contentment, and was instead filled with an annoyed exasperation. I think they were all just lucky that it was in a hallway with teachers. Juden grinned. You obviously missed all of the concern that Yuhi-sensei had for them when she showed up for chemistry. I swear, the effort of not laughing was killing me. Izuku smiled, but he found it lacked anything. The article was definitely something that belonged on their new site, and it was always good to try and deflate Bakugo's ego a little, but he struggled to see the humor in the situation. There had been at least 6 different pro heroes on the scene, while 3 schoolchildren had been held hostage, visibly drowning in sludge, and not one of them had made a move to help. Death Arms, 2 of his sidekicks, Kamui Woods and Mount Lady had done nothing but stand around, while Backdraft had busied himself with crowd control, but even that could have been handled by the police and the fire department. The group had stood by and watched, unwilling to get themselves involved, until All Might had appeared. Leaping out of a nearby sewer grate, All Might had swooped in and defeated the sludge villain in a single blow, dispersing the excess of his body away, and allowing the police to cuff the body that remained and collect the rest of him in bags for transport. He'd been at the hospital while it happened, having gotten the last train through before the excitement, but Juden had been quick to relay everything to him over the phone, while his mom drove them home that night. Juden had found the involvement of Bakugo and 2 members of his goon squad hilarious, and Izuku would be lying if he didn't admit to the odd chuckle or 2 at his descriptions, but the very thought of people whose job it was to save lives, refusing to do so because it was too challenging, bothered him in a way that he didn't know it could. He couldn't imagine his mom or any of her colleagues refusing to treat a child because they found the task too difficult, but just the idea that the heroes could, and would get away with it without any repercussions just burned something fierce in his gut. And he didn't know what to do about it. Izuku knew that his mom didn't like heroes. Well, actually, saying that wasn't fair. It wasn't that his mom didn't like them, it was that she didn't like the celebrity culture that came along with pro heroes. Every day, his mom dealt with sick and injured kids, and having been volunteering at the hospital for years, Izuku knew that a lot of those injuries came from kids fighting and playing pretend at being pro heroes. The younger kids followed the older ones, and the older ones took bigger and bigger risks, hitting each other harder, doing more dangerous stunts, and gaining more and more serious injuries. The higher ranked and more popular the pro hero was, the more they were emulated, and that was all his mom saw. The more someone acted like All Might on a playground, the more likely they were to jump off something too high or get into a fight against someone, and in the end, they'd break something and end up lying on a bed in the hospital's emergency department. Izuku didn't know he felt about all of it. He knew that, to a point, his mom was correct. Pro-heroes did cause kids to behave in ways that put them at risk, but at the same time, Izuku couldn't imagine what the world would be like, or even who he'd be, if he hadn't grown up watching the likes of All Might on TV. He'd grown up seeing All Might pull people out of burning buildings, rushing in to save not just complete strangers, but people who needed his help. He'd seen him catch people who were falling, outrun bullets, and even rescue the occasional cat out of a tree. He'd also seen the many, many articles, news reports, roundtable discussions, and podcasts discussing All Might's power and the dangers that came with it, including what would happen if All Might had ever lost control. He'd not only seen them debate the pros and cons of All Might's presence, but he'd also seen the way All Might had always refused to answer the question of just how powerful he was. When he was just 3 years old, Izuku had been strong enough to lift his grandfather's old truck above his head, and he knew that his body had only grown stronger since. He ate well. Being the son of a nurse meant that he was very aware of his daily nutritional requirements, but even with that, he rarely ever set aside dedicated time to exercise, at least not in any meaningful way, and he spent far more time in front of a computer screen than was advised. Yet despite that, he remained in peak health. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and despite his relative lack of exercise, extremely well-toned. His muscles were noticeable, but not bulky, and no matter what he did during the day before, or however late he stayed up past his bedtime, whenever he woke up, he did so feeling refreshed. Unlike his mom, who he'd seen with bags under her eyes as she inhaled her morning coffee, or Juden, who kept a solid supply of Endeavor energy in both his bedroom and their school office, Izuku had never felt the need to pep himself up first thing in the morning, or late at night. All he needed was to feel the sun on his face, and he knew that that felt better to him than any amount of caffeine ever would. "You okay, pal? That's a lot of words you're saying." He blinked, not realizing that he'd drifted off in his own head and started mumbling, "Oh, sorry." "No problem," he shrugged. "So there's a huge gaping problem with society as a whole. What else is new? It just feels like we should be doing something about it. You saw the entire thing. So did a street full of people. But all the news is talking about is how All Might showed up to save the day. You could post your article." "I already did?" Juden rolled his eyes. "Not that one. The one you wrote before the principal made you post the All Might 1-inch. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please," he scoffed. "I know you, Izuku. You don't yell, you don't lose your temper, and you don't complain, but you do use your articles to help work through your feelings." He turned to raise him fully, one eyebrow raised in amusement. "And are you seriously going to look me in the eye and tell me that you didn't write something that's a lot harsher about the pros involved?" "I might have done a rough draft of something," he admitted. "Then let's post it." He sighed. "You just want something for Flamebird, don't you?" "Izuku, my friend, it never hurts to try and reach out to a wider audience when you have a truth to share. And you have a truth to share. One worth hearing, so," he flung an arm around his shoulders, pulling him down until they were face to face. "Get to giving me the honesty already. JJ, has anyone ever told you that you're kind of needy?" "No, but if they did, they'd probably still love me anyway." "Probably. Destruction and disregard. Pro-heroes fail to save and protect." Written by Mr. Justice. Photographs by Mr. Truth. Wednesday, April 20th, 2225. The city of Mizudafu was thrust into chaos yesterday afternoon when a group of pro-heroes engaged a local D-rank villain, referred to only as the Sludge Villain, real name unknown. While the villain was ultimately subdued, the incident has only served to cast a light on the pro-heroes for their handling of the situation. The confrontation began when the Sludge Villain attacked a group of young boys, including a wheelchair user, taking them as hostages, and utilizing his quirk to gain some slight control over their movements. Despite an initial rapid response from several pro-heroes, including Backdraft, rank number 161, Peak, number 84, and Death Arms, rank number 177, Peak, number 91, as well as newcomers Kamui Woods and Mount Lady, currently unranked, their efforts to rescue proved futile and led to significant property damage and civilian panic. Local eyewitnesses reported seeing multiple heroes failing to restrain the villain with brute force, before largely abandoning their attempts at rescue, in favor of waiting for a more suitable quirk to arrive, with the delays reportedly responsible for causing millions of yen in collateral damage to nearby structures, as well as sending many bystanders to the hospital, having sustained injuries as a result of the hero's lack of action. The situation reached a critical point when the All Might, rank number 1, peak number 1, arrived on the scene. Using his immense strength, All Might was able to finally disperse the sludge villain in moments and rescue the trapped children. Local resident Haruto Nakamura, a baker whose storefront was damaged during the skirmish, expressed his frustration. "We expect our heroes to protect us, not put us in more danger. The way they handled things was dangerous and could have been avoided with better coordination." Mr. Nakamura's sentiments have been echoed online by many Mizutofu residents, who are now calling for a re-evaluation of the strategies employed by pro-heroes in similar high-stakes situations. Questions have arisen about the preparedness and judgment of the heroes involved, with many asking if their licenses should be suspended. As the dust settles, Mizutofu citizens are left to pick up the pieces, both literally and figuratively, while the pro-heroes on scene have walked away with seemingly no repercussion. The defeat of the sludge villain may be seen as a victory for some, but it has also served as a stark reminder of the critical need for heroes to balance their formidable powers with responsibility and precision. Initial reports out of a local medical center report that the children were all later released, with only minor injuries, and are expected to make a full recovery. All Might, the mighty agency, and the Hero Public Safety Commission could not be reached for comment. "I mean, it's a little less scorched earth than I was expecting, but not too shabby at all. To be honest, it was a lot harsher to begin with, but the more I wrote, the more I toned it down." "Okay, but why?" "Because I realized that I wasn't being completely fair to them." "Seriously?" Izuku nodded. "Seriously. It's easy to cast judgment on people from a distance or after the fact, but until you've stood where they are and had to make the calls that they needed to make, you can't honestly say what you would have done, let alone what they should have done." "Izuku, has anyone ever told you that you have a bleeding heart?" "No, but if they did, they'd probably still love me anyway." "Probably." There was a comfortable pause, as the two of them watched, as JJ's fingers clicked upload, and sent Izuku's latest non-high school approved article to the Flamebird homepage, where their 24 followers might choose to bother reading it. "You know, it's almost a shame that you didn't include this one on your UA application. It might be nice watching them try and defend their alumni. To do that, we'd have to take Flamebird public." He glanced at his friend. "Are you thinking of doing that?" "Nah, it'd take half the fun out of it. Besides, if I did that, it might cost me a place at Seijin Dash. You know, UA has Dash, a solid journalism course, but you know as well as I do that it's not as good as the one at Seijin. UA spends more time focusing on the hero and support courses than everything else, and that's not what I'm interested in." "I know." "You don't need to sound so glum, Mr. Justice. They're on the opposite side of the same city. I won't be a million miles away, and besides, I still expect a Flamebird article from you, from time to time." "Fine, Mr. Truth, but I expect a really nice letter from you, to go in with my UA application." "Well, as your boss, Dash." "Oh, don't even go there. I'll have you know that I've already written one. I just need you to proofread it, print it, and give it to me to sign." Izuku found himself involuntarily raising one of his eyebrows. "Proofread it?" "Yeah, proofread it." JJ waved him off. "Check for any spelling mistakes. Add anything you want me to include. Take out anything you don't dash. You want me to write my own letter of recommendation, don't you? Could you do mine while you're at it? You're unbelievable. But you love me anyway? Unbelievable." It had been 2 years since he'd walked into the minuscule office set aside for the Aldris School News, and in that time, he'd written 39 independent articles for the school's news page, 19 which had either been turned away or written independently and uploaded to JJ's Flamebird blog, and he'd contributed to the writing for 76 of their weekly school news updates. He'd also written 2 letters of recommendation on behalf of the Aldris School News, one to Seijin High School for JJ, and one to the Ultra Academy of Heroics for himself. And that was where he found himself. A large blue arch hung above him, framing the entryway as he looked up at the golden gates of the greatest hero school in the world. Taking a breath to steady himself, he stepped forwards, crossing the threshold and moved towards the future. Part 1. Secret Origin. Chapter 5. Izuku Midoriya Origin. One of the first things I can remember is my mom being afraid. I never really knew what of, but I can always remember her having this feeling of anxiety around her. I always wanted to relieve it, but I never knew where it came from. Took me years to understand her. To understand that she was afraid, but not because of me and what I could do, my oldest fear, but for me. She'd heard the horror stories and the rumors of what happened to individuals that stood out for their powerful quirks. And when she discovered what I was capable of, she lived in perpetual fear of what could become of me. Yet, despite all of that, I know that Mom never once considered giving up on me. She wasn't a perfect mother, I know that, but she did her best, and I think that her best was pretty good. She was never cruel or harsh, and she never wanted to stop us from doing what we loved. She worried about us both, though for very different reasons, but she always tried to find a way to support us. And in the end, I'd like to think that we turned out okay. Some of her worries were well-founded. In the time that made up my teenage years, a lot of bad things did happen. That doesn't mean that good things didn't happen, but a lot of the worries she'd carried were realized at one point. We got past them too, but I think that just made her worry about my sister all the more. I can't blame her though, I worried too. And that was before she was old enough to start dating. As he was applying to both the heroics course and their general education department, Izuku was given a priority placement, and during UA's designated exam week, he was given one of the Monday exam slots. He made sure to arrive at the check-in time they'd specified and joined the queue for screening, making sure that he had his student ID ready so that they could verify his identity and give him his examinee number. He took a moment, stood under their gateway to catch his breath and appreciate where he was standing, because the day was February 20th, and he hoped it would be the day that everything changed. Because it was the day of the UA entrance exam. And no matter what else happened around the world that day, Izuku was determined that in his little slice of Japan, everything was going to go well. He handed over his ID card when asked, and after the bored-looking administrator took a moment to check his name against their registry, he handed it back with a freshly printed sticker that contained his examinee number and told him to wait for Group Lambda to be called to enter. He thanked him for his time, which either went ignored or unheard, he wasn't sure which, and made his way over to the entrance area so that he could move when he was called for. He had to slip through gaps as people rushed past him, careful to twist with them, lest someone slam into one of his shoulders and hurt themselves. Thankfully, he found a relatively isolated spot besides a lamppost and leant against it, happy to be out of the mass. He stood for a moment, trying to calm his own nerves, before his phone buzzed in his pocket, and he fished it out. Truth and justice. Truth. Good luck. Kick some explosive ass. Justice. Thanks. I don't think that's how the exam works though. I haven't signed in yet, but I'm sure that'll get me disqualified before I'm allowed to start. Truth. Kicking ass is a no-go? Fuck that. Justice. If I target Bakugo for no reason, then yes, they will probably disqualify me for kicking ass. Truth. Hang on. Who said anything about targeting Bakugo? Justice. Carrot explosive carrot? What else could that mean? Truth. But, I mean, he's an asshole? Justice. I need to go now, they're calling my group in now. Wish me luck? Truth. Good luck. Again. And kick ass. While she saw students everywhere piling through the main gate, dressed in an abundance of uniform styles, Mitsuki was glad that she didn't have to make Katsuki go through that. He could be considered irritable on his good days, but thankfully, UA had arranged for them to be able to use the private car park. She buzzed in at the gate and was let through almost immediately. Backing up, she reversed into one of the larger parking spaces near the door, ignoring the grumbling about her parking skills from her backseat driver. It was times like this that she missed her much smaller sedan. Usually, she had the smaller car, Given that Masaru was more often at home than she was and acted as their son's primary caretaker, but as he needed to work on editing his latest shoot, and she didn't have any work planned until next Thursday, the duty of making sure that Katsuki arrived at UA for his entrance exam fell to her. Putting the minivan into park, she tried not to sigh in relief now that she was able to stop. She turned to face her son but found that he was already working on the door to get out. "For the love of Kat, will you just wait and I'll dash?" He yanked the door open with far more force than was necessary, and all but threw his wheelchair out of the door and used the door to pull himself out and into it, before she'd even managed to get around the side of the car. "I'm fine," he growled out. "Now let's do this shit." "Kat's dash." "Language," a voice cautioned. "But otherwise, that's what we like to hear." She span around, Katsuki having no bother to tell her that someone was behind her, finding that there was a man approaching them, and the first thing that she noticed was that he wasn't wearing a shirt. Short and skinny, she could make out a mess of ginger hair beneath his dumb-looking helmet, which she assumed meant that he was one of the pro heroes that worked at UA, or at least he was someone they'd brought in to help on exam day. His hands were ridiculously large when compared to his small frame and appeared to be capped in orange L-shaped pieces or armor. He drew close to them, and she just make out a pair of dull blue eyes behind his helmet, which now that she took a moment for a better look, she felt looked like a digger bucket. Just because she knew what it was though, didn't mean that she didn't think he looked any less stupid. "Greetings. I'm Higuri Maijima with UA High, though you might know me better as Dash, the excavation hero, power loader," her son cut in, identifying him with ease, though even knowing his name, she still only had the vaguest idea of who he was. "You run the UA support courses, right?" He grinned. "Got it in one kid. And you?" He held out his hand to shake. "Our Katsuki Bakugo, prospective hero course and support course student. I took a look at the designs you submitted, and I gotta say," he gave a once-over to the obviously heavily modified wheelchair, which was steel gray in color. "They were impressive." "Below them," he grunted, while she shook the man's hand. "So, where do we go from here?" "Right this way, ma'am," the pro hero told her with a sweep of his arms, before he began leading them inside. "We've got a space reserved for those who need more than the standard designated space. After that, your son will be taken to his Heroics Physical Exam Center on one of our coaches, all of which are wheelchair accessible. Following that, he'll be escorted back here. You're aware that the practical exam for support won't start until Wednesday." "We're already booked in," she confirmed, as her son said nothing, and she knew that he was already hyper-focused on the exam in front of him. "Excellent. Well then, youngest Bakugo, this is you." He held open the door, which would lead him to his exam station. "And if you'd like to come with me," he told her, "we can set you up in the waiting area with some light refreshment." "That sounds lovely." She bent down to press a kiss to Katsuki's cheek, ignoring his attempt to pull away, claiming that he was too old for that, before angrily rolling himself inside as she called out, "Good luck, Cats." "I don't need your damn luck. Don't be ungrateful. Just get out of here." Returning his phone to his pocket, Izuku nodded to himself as he walked forwards, through the dozens upon dozens of other students, all of whom were also heading towards their designated entrance points. When they called out for the Lambda group, he patted himself down, making sure that he still had his trusty backpack, pencil case and wallet, before switching off his phone. He joined the, thankfully much calmer, group that was making their way inside. He missed the uneven paving stone beneath his feet, nervous as he was, and wasn't able to control his strength to stop it. In another life, he might have tripped and fallen, but as it was, all he did was shear off the edge of the slab and send it skittering away from him. Behind him, a brunette girl had reached out her hand to stop him from falling, having seen his foot hit the edge of the slab, but she brought her hand back to conceal her giggle, as she saw his foot completely destroy that particular piece of uneven flooring.